So,
So how long are we speaking for? The podcast is an hour?
well,
You edit it.
however long you want to
Okay.
talk,
Okay.
we can be here like until the coronavirus is over. And
Well,
it
I've
gives us
just been
something
having
to do.
no, I've just actually had the experience of because what I'm shifting to doing because I can't tour right now is I've
Right.
got an entire hard drive of like 20 years of interviews and videos.
Of yourself.
Yeah, concerts, and I mean, and I've just been looking through it all, trying to see, okay, are there little 30-second and 60-second Instagrammable things that I can do?
Cool.
And because I can't tour, I'm going to have to somehow be much more present with social media, which I'm always a little bit like,
Yeah.
about. But it's now that's all there is.
But
So
see, this could be the time of the.
right,
Do you put your marketing hat on?
yeah. No, I need to do that. But I've been listening to myself talk and watching myself talk and starting to understand like when it works and when it doesn't, and
See,
So
I'm new to that. So
Mhm.
this is you're my eighth or ninth
Uh-huh.
person. So
Right.
I haven't even seen anything. I'm going to be terrified probably.
Are you
but-
rolling right now?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because
But-
that's always a recording rule, which is just press record. And a lot of the time, the best things happen
Oh,
before
yeah.
anybody is conscious at all about what's happening.
Well, this is the whole idea for this is like, I love reading biographies and memoirs
Right.
and watching documentaries, and I get so much out of it from people, and
Yeah.
there's people who have not written their biography. So
Right. Well,
I said podcast is
I think
the
it's
best
too early in my
platform.
career to write a
I
biography.
know, I'm
it's
just
funny.
saying,
Yeah.
so because I love it. So
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then I said, let's just give it a go, So
No, it's great. It's
Yeah.
great.
and I think it's probably really valuable for people who think like, how did he become an artist? How did he, kind of, what path did he take? Well, how
Right.
did he get here? So
Right.
yeah,
Well, are you asking that?
yeah.
Okay.
No, but I mean, I know that you just recorded an album, but that's not a kirtan album because I know you as a kirtan artist.
Well, that's actually how people
Perceive you,
how people perceive me. I mean, I guess I'll go back to the beginning of this.
right?
When I was a child, I think I recall writing a song for the first time at age 5.
No
It just
way.
occurred to me that, I could do that.
Were you playing an instrument already or no?
Well, no, I wasn't, but we had a piano. But the way it started actually is that when I was 4 or 5 years old, I had monsters under my bed. And it was really a problem because I was afraid to walk in my room and go to bed because I was sure that they would eat me. And of course, this took a lot of reassurance as a child. And what I did is I arranged my room so that I could walk in and jump on a chair and then up on the desk and then jump across to a chest of drawers and then I could jump into bed, right?
No kidding.
And this way I would not be eaten by the monster. And my mother observed me doing this one night and she had the most beautiful response. She said, "Oh, what will we do about the monsters?" She didn't say there's no monster.
Right.
She
I
was
like
like,
it.
"Oh yeah, this is a
She's
problem."
buying into your little fantasy.
Right. And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Well, what if you made up a little song and sang a song to your monster?"
Kind of to tame them.
Yeah. And maybe the monster will listen to the song, or maybe the monster will sing along, but maybe the monster will be soothed because of course she used to sing to me to put me to sleep.
So music was like very present in your
Oh, yeah.
house?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
she could have also said, why don't you write a letter to the
No, my
monster?"
mother played the piano very well, so
Okay.
it was always present in the house. And I
Nice.
remember her singing to me when I was quite young, so that was part of me going to bed. So the idea that I would make up a song also to the monster, I was like, well, of course, yes. I'm
Do
used
you
to,
remember the song?
Not exactly, but it was on the level of, "Oh, monster, don't eat me," something like this. But we were just making it up. And so she stood at the door while I sang the song to the monster. And
As you were going to bed?
Yes, and I managed to make it to bed without being eaten. So it became a nightly ritual that I would make up a song before I went to
A
bed.
new one all the time.
Yeah, sometimes it was, last night's song was good and I would remember it, but I would make up songs,
I love that. It's so sweet.
And so that's actually how I became a songwriter, was to sing to my monsters, okay? And the monsters are still there, and I'm still singing to them.
Okay.
To really just kind of like sum the whole thing up.
Is that your method?
I suppose. I mean, originally it was something really personal. It wasn't a matter of having an audience. It was a matter of trying to soothe myself, try to calm my own fears. I mean, later I realized the monster was inside of me. And much later when I became involved in the yoga movement, I started to realize how connected my inner self and my inner projections were to the way that I experienced the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept on singing to the monsters. But when I was a child, or actually as I got to be a teenager, I did the usual things, learning how to play songs that I heard. I took piano lessons and didn't like them very much because the teacher was sort of cruel.
Teacher's so important.
Oh, yeah. And they wanted me to play some melodies that were, I'm sorry, just lame.
That's when I quit.
Right. Right. But I persisted, and actually then I picked up a guitar for a while. And
how old were you?
I think I was 7 when I took piano lessons and 9 when I started playing the guitar. And but the thing is that an interesting thing happened when I was 12. I was playing the guitar pretty well, and I had abandoned the piano. And but I was hit by a motorcycle while I was riding my bicycle when I was 12, the day after school had let out for the summer, and it broke my left arm. Wow. And so I was facing a summer with my arm in a cast. And I was already playing the guitar with some facility, and so I couldn't play it anymore because my left hand wasn't working. So I sat down at the family piano, and I spent the summer teaching my right hand what my left hand knew. And slowly figuring out, okay, that's a D chord, these are the notes on the guitar, and then I play it with my right hand. And so I developed, and my thumb was working because I could, it was still sticking out of the cast, and I could play a bass note. So I would play chords with my right hand and a bass note with my left hand, and then I could sing on top of it. And by the end of the summer, I was kind of functional doing that. By the time the cast came off my arm, I was already, making up songs on the piano. So I became sort of conversant switching back between keyboards and guitars. But the funny thing is flash forward many, many years later, after I'd lived in India and I started playing the harmonium. For listeners who don't know what a harmonium is, a harmonium is a little pump organ that you sit in front of it. It sounds like an accordion, but Indians have adapted it so you can sit cross-legged and play it. And it's often used in, mantra music and meditation music. And you pump with your left hand and you play chords with your right hand.
So you weren't training unconsciously for that all your life from the cast.
Right, exactly.
Look at that.
Right, exactly. So later I was like, oh,
Universe works in mysterious ways.
Indeed. But the songs that I made up, aside from the monster songs, most of them didn't have lyrics. So I would sing in a kind of invented language. That just kind of came out, this wordless kind of, scat, not really jazz, but this kind of wordless pre-language thing. And so that's how most of the songs that I wrote were. They didn't actually have words. I studied opera for a while, or I studied classically, and learned to sing in French and German and
Was this
Italian.
after school stuff, or is that already older?
It was after school stuff. And so I knew I was a musician since I was a kid, but then I started to study it. And so I developed a facility to sing in languages that I didn't understand. And this was important later, especially when I ended up in India. But my mother was quite supportive. My father was deeply opposed to it. So I had to basically make music when he wasn't home.
Secretly.
And when he came home, I would stop.
Why? Was he like, you need to study something solid and get a profession that will make you a career? And
those things. I mean, my father is
like conservative.
My father's a super, intelligent man, but he grew up in a small town in Texas and southern Illinois, and came from really working class roots. And he married. My mother was from sort of upper level of society, and he was one of the first people in his family to go to college, and he became a doctor. So he made a big social move, but from the way he understood things, like studying music wasn't something that he was used to. This was something that my mother, from her background, understood. But my father thought that basically boys just played sports and that that's what you should do. And
never considered it a profession even, probably.
No,
it's not feasible.
He didn't think of it as something that you would professionally do. And I think, honestly, his own sense of, masculinity was sort of involved in, he wanted his son to be, also a sports guy. And,
Were you an only child?
No, I was the oldest child.
Okay.
And I mean, ultimately, we did find things we could do together. I grew up basically on Lake Michigan. I learned how to swim when I was a child, and we also would ski in the winter. So it's not like there weren't athletic things going on. I just was completely uninterested in baseball, football, and basketball, and he couldn't really grok that. And so I spent most of my teen years in a way having to sort of protect my music.
So it was almost like your little secret kind
It
of
was like my little secret
practice.
thing. Yeah. And so it was only once I was in the university that that it started to come out. And but even then, I wasn't really sure what to do with it. You know, how to put it out in the world.
What did you study in university?
Well, I was a music major for about a semester. And I was in these classes, music theory and composition like this, with all these people who had fiercely intimidating skills. You know, people who could read a chart and just like play, the violin amazingly. And so I was trying to keep up with it. And one day there was a class where we were asked to improvise, and I was the only person who could. And
because you were free in your music making.
Yeah, exactly. And it blew my mind that all these people, I'd spent an entire semester being intimidated by their musical skills, only to realize that when you took the music away from them, they couldn't play.
And also knowing that there's another way. Because we get so limited sometimes by the curriculum, that it's like some people give up. I know so many people who dropped out of music schools because of that, because they felt limited.
Right. So, and it felt at that point like, okay, I don't know what, I learned how to, be completely conversant in music theory. That turned out to be useful. I learned to study, classic patterns of composition. Those turned out to be useful. I learned how to hear a phrase and write it down, and that turned out to be useful. So it served its purpose, but it wasn't long after that I said I have to find something else to do. So I moved over really to the film school, and I was going to school in Madison, Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin, which is, a big university in a fairly cosmopolitan place. And the film school was right next to the music department, but the music department had also a department of ethnomusicology, which I found really interesting. So I started to get involved in one playing in a gamelan orchestra.
What's that?
It's Indonesian music, and like there are these
like xylophone.
They're like
of things.
Yeah, they're kind of like
bamboo kind.
No, they're made of metal. And what you do is they look like xylophones, but they're made of metal, and it's played in an ensemble. So it's very polyrhythmic, and everybody you have a specific part and way it fits in, and you play it often with hammers, and then you kind of dampen it, as you go along. And your part doesn't really make any sense except for in a much bigger part, the way it all interlocks. And the music doesn't fit Western scales. So there's notes that are between the Western scales. Like there's Slendro and Palog, and one is a 5-tone scale, one's a 7-tone scale. And that started to turn my ear like into another way of listening, but it also really helped me to understand how like each part fit a greater whole, and that you had to kind of surrender to that. The music was something that was bigger than any one of us.
Right.
So that was a really powerful experience to play in a gamelan orchestra. And also they had what was called a musique concrète studio, which was, in a pre-sampling day, everything was all on tape. And they encouraged us to record sounds and manipulate them. So, I did a lot of like tape loops or cut things up. Just to flash back, when I was 9, I had a reel-to-reel tape recorder that I'd got from my grandmother, like this old Wallen sack. This thing weighs about like 20 pounds, like big thing. And I would record.
It makes a boombox look like a Walkman.
Oh yeah, for sure. But it was fun, and I had it down in the basement, and I would record things on it. I remember recording specifically "Within You, Without You" from the Beatles. And I cut it up in a lot of different little pieces and put it back together in another order, which later when I studied musique concrète, I was like, well, that was sort of advanced for a 9-year-old,
Hells yeah.
And it was really cool, and I wish I still had the tape, because who knows what happened to it, But it, it was kind of parts of it were playing forward and backward, and I realized you could manipulate things in really interesting ways. So. But music school introduced me to people like Steve Reich and John Cage and there were in a whole school of people who were.
How so? How did it introduce you to those artists?
Well, I'd never actually heard of them
okay.
or heard their music ever, and the idea that parts could interlock and move it, and that the repetition could change slightly and then have another effect. I remember a piece that Steve Reich did that really influenced me called Violin Phase, in which a performer takes a repeated figure and then begins to play in overdub against himself, playing slightly faster against the track, and I think it's on 4 different tracks. And the piece is completed where he keeps going ahead until he starts to catch up with himself. And the piece ends when it all comes back into phase, okay? And hearing how a sequence of things could go out of phase with itself and then come back, to me was really interesting. And so I spent a lot of time in college doing things with tape loops and using oscillators to change the speed of it. And also,
Did you figure all that out yourself, or was it with a group? Was it a
Well, I had an instructor
collective,
who was interested in that, but they had basically a lab where you could just go into the studio and be there at 2:00 in the morning
and experiment,
making tape loops and cutting things up and moving things around. And so it was really freeing to be able to do that. And at the same time, I was convinced I was going to be an avant-garde filmmaker who was going to change the world. And I was also making loops of these film loop movies where I would make these long loops of series of shots and then use 3 projectors and superimpose the images on top of each other to see, what kind of patterns would happen. So I would make these pieces that were multiple loops of music, multiple loops of visuals, and those things would go around until.
So it was more like a art installation, so to speak.
Yeah. And I would do those kinds of things in college. And I made a friend who was the director of the Madison Art Center at the time, because I was actually doing an installation where I was putting microphones in places in the city to get their sounds and then sending them to other locations. And at one point, I had a thing in a kind of gallery space where all these sounds were kind of showing up. So it was a way of kind of superimposing the sounds of different parts of the city onto each other. And the guy came in and he was like, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And so he was helpful and took some interest in what I was doing.
Was he championing you?
I mean, to a point, it turns out he was also interested in me in ways that weren't entirely about art, and that produced some uncomfortable situations. But let's just say I'm probably much more sympathetic to women's perspective about what sometimes they have to do to advance themselves, or the kinds of I'll do this for you sort of thing that are presented. So I have some awareness of that. But nonetheless, that experience did kind of introduce me to the art world in certain ways that I was just kind of playing around, but there it was. And at the same time, I had a job working for a commercial production facility in Madison, Wisconsin. I wandered in looking for a job, and they were, the kind of thing that does like local Chevrolet dealership commercials and things like this, but
sure, pays the bills.
Yeah, but they wanted, I needed a job in college, and they wanted, and I said, "Well, what are your qualifications?" And I said, "Well, I'm a musician." And they said, "Good, great, that's perfect.
Jingles.
You can be an editor." No, they were like, editors understand rhythm and everything.
Yeah.
So I ended up working on those things, a bunch of commercials.
Did you have editing classes in film school too?
Yeah, I had editing classes in film school, but it turned out I had like everybody's dream job working, at like age 19 for this commercial production company, and that was really cool. And it actually directly sort of got me to LA because at the time, the director, Francis Ford Coppola, was in Madison making advertisements for Jerry Brown was running for president at the time, and it was during the Wisconsin primary, which was influential. And
what year was that?
1980.
Oh my God,
I'm old. They came in and they were looking for production help, and so I ended up working for Dean Tavalouris, Francis Ford Coppola's art director, on these super trippy campaign things that they were doing, because they were calling him like Governor Moonbeam, and he's got Francis Ford Coppola and all these people there. And like they're dissolving spaceships through his head, and like
That's so
it's just
wicked.
It was so trippy. In the front of the Wisconsin State Capitol, all these projections and everything. It was really cool. He lost the election, but nonetheless, they turned me on to an internship at that was available at Columbia Pictures, and so I wrote an essay, and I came out here.
What was the essay about?
I forget, but it just, I don't know.
It was like the requirement to get in?
Yeah, it was like write an essay for whatever it is.
It was your application?
It was my application. A bunch of people applied for it, and
you got it.
I got it. And so I came out and worked at Columbia Pictures for a summer.
Here in L.A.?
Yeah. And so that was the first time I'd really come to L.A. and, established some relationships. And it was between my junior and senior year in college, and convinced me, okay, definitely this is where I'm coming. And so I went back. I almost didn't go back and finish school, but I did.
But it was a great opportunity.
Yeah, sure, because I maintained some of those connections, and then, kind of moved out here with a bunch of film school friends, and, things started. So, but I didn't, I played in some punk bands, when I was out
here.
Yeah, yeah. And,
really?
Oh, yeah.
In the 80s?
Yeah, yeah.
What did you play, guitar?
I sang and I played guitar.
Did you have blue hair?
I did have blue hair.
Me too.
Yeah, I had a blue mohawk. There's some great photographs.
Oh my God, I cannot even picture that.
And it's funny how kind of this stuff kind of goes around, because much later, I got involved in the yoga world. But I was in some bands with this friend of mine, Hans Christian, who's a German guy, and he was a bass player and also a cellist, and I think he'd played with like Nina Hagen and all these people. Yeah, yeah, and so we were in a bunch of these kinds of things. Later in my life, he shows up, and like he gets the yoga thing too. And it was just like suddenly, I ran into him. And I'm like, "What are you doing here?" It's like the last time we both had like blue hair, and here we are now going like, Om Namah Shivaya, and he's actually now produced a lot of
I remember he produced
records.
Also one of yours, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, he's produced actually two of mine.
I met him. I think I met him with you.
Did.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But don't you think it's kind of interesting, like the older we get, like that these sciences come into our lives because we're searching for something.
Well, that's the whole thing, is that what I realized, looking back at like the punk movement, you actually start to see what was actually spiritual about it, like how it was breaking through concepts of like self and society and our relationship to one another, and like trying to reach towards some pure raw statement of like,
it's a different form, kind of, but it was rebellious also in a way that we find ourselves, like who we authentically are.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that it was reaching toward something that was an authentic expression, and that was a powerful thing. But, Los Angeles in the 80s had a lot of that stuff going on. It was quite interesting, but it was also, we were entering a period of manufactured music, too, that was not so appealing.
Yeah.
And,
I lived through that.
Yes.
Not in L.A., but the 80s, shoulder pads.
Yeah. So I didn't really, I still made music. I had like a 4-track reel-to-reel and things like this, and I just never really tried to put it out there, because it was mostly, working as an assistant editor and then an editor on mostly commercials, which was fascinating and soul-deadening at the same time.
Did you feel that this is not your path at that point? Because it feels like you were living parallel lives with the music and the editing.
Well, I felt like that, but the funny thing is, later, of course, often in the rear of your mirror, you look at your life and you're like, oh, I see how this all made sense, right?
It's always looking in retrospect. You're connecting the dots, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
But what was happening in editing? Like, I was also editing a lot of that kind of TV documentary product where they go interview people and bring back a bunch of interviews and B-roll and everything from it was kind of the beginning of this kind of reality TV thing where they would go to like beauty pageants for like 4-year-olds and you'd sit there and edit this stuff and be like, wow, this is bizarre. Like,
and why am I doing this?
Why am I doing? Well, it was interesting, but also like I realized or actually one of my favorite ones was this thing that that involved like the Outlaws Motorcycle Club in Milwaukee, Wisconsin staged this thing called Bubba's Honda Drop. And like, I don't know why I remember this, but what they would do is they would go, all these motorcycle dudes would buy up these Japanese motorcycles, and they had this big event where they'd haul them up on a big construction crane and set them on fire and then run over them with like army tanks and then set this blowtorch on them, and then they'd all drink beer and then have some kind of like strip show in front of it with like Wisconsin girls dancing in front of the flames. It was like, I mean, these kind of snapshots of the weirdness of American life. On one hand, I was like, wow, it's a strange thing, you know. But I was sitting in an editing room in Burbank, you know, eating takeout Thai food in like a room that was air conditioned to the point of freezing, and I wasn't going anywhere. I was just witnessing things through other eyes and processing them. And so there was something that was deadening about that. And also the advertising business, working on that stuff. You know, you'd get really self-important clients from Chicago that would come in and, you know, drink heavily and obsess over 109 takes of like opening a bag of potato chips.
I worked in advertising too.
Right?
And does the potato chip has to lay like this when they shoot, and you go like, come on, shoot the fucking thing.
Right. No, this was actually the end of my career as commercial editor. Like, I remember literally it was a potato chip commercial. I think Granny Goose potato chips, somehow I remember it. Like, and these clients had just been going on and on.
We're not endorsing this product.
No, we're definitely not. We're definitely not. They probably don't even make it anymore.
They're out of business.
Right. But I remember them obsessing over it and like wanting to look at takes again and again and again. And finally, at literally 2:00 in the morning, you know, they said, "Dave, what do you think?" And I turned around and I said, "I think it's a fucking potato chip commercial, and you're abusing me." It's like, I'm here to like, actually, I could have made this decision like 8 hours ago. And, you know, you guys are just back there drinking and going on about something that's not important. And like, I'm done. And I walked out, you know. And, you know, then the next morning I called my boss and I was like, he laughed because he'd heard about it, you know, because of course it's one of those things like everybody wants to actually speak the truth about it, you know, but
good
people
for
get
you.
paid so much and everything. But I was like, yeah, I'm fired, right? He was like, yeah, you know, what else can I mean, I'm sorry, you know, I have to, but, you know, but
maybe that was fate because, you know, you
time,
wanted out anyway.
He was kind of applauding me, actually. He was like, I dared to do something that I think everybody had wanted to do, you know, but I was out.
And this was the time of when advertising had these big budgets and they were also self-important and stuff.
It was insane. They were spending like $1 million on these commercials.
Yeah.
You know?
Did you also feel like you were betraying yourself kind of doing advertising because it's manipulation in a way?
Yeah,
it's
deeply.
Like,
I mean, I realized how much... Again, it was like in search of the authentic. I was like, this is the opposite of the authentic.
Because it's manipulative capitalism is what advertising is what's coming back now with the social media kind of manipulation.
It's just manipulating people's desire and using it for all the wrong reasons.
For greed.
Yeah, for greed.
Pretty much.
And not for some higher purpose.
No.
But for something that, you know, that was really only going to create more illusion. You know?
Correct.
But this all kind of figures in like what comes later in terms of how I ended up becoming a mantra musician largely. I had resisted meeting various spiritual teachers. During high school, I was involved in some kind of Christian movement thing that was a social group.
Was that from, were you religious from your upbringing?
No, not so much. I mean, my parents, you know, wanted to get us involved in church, and you know, I was growing up in Wisconsin and Chicago, and you know, these are things you did. So I went to the Lutheran church, and we had like a hip young pastor who ran a coffee house out of the church basement and smoked weed, and you know,
no way.
And he was cool, you know, and Steve Samuelson, and he had another kind of take on the spiritual that I found refreshing, and there was kind of a group of people around him, and you know, kids that he was, you know, it was his job to keep together. And so
he kind of got out of the doctrinated kind of.
Yeah, and so there was a coffee shop, and
Yeah.
folk singers would come, and
Cool.
this kind of
Sounds
thing.
good.
It was cool.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of questions with Christianity. Like this idea that there was something wrong with me inherently bothered me, because I felt instinctively that we're born good and that we somehow lose our way, but not that we're born bad and have to somehow be. I mean, it just, the theology didn't work for me, and
Right. Me neither.
Yeah, right. I mean, the thing,
Obviously.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah. But the thing is the Great Lakes Midwest is actually a place where a lot of German and Scandinavian people moved, and so there's actually quite it's much more open-minded. Like the Christianity that I was exposed to there was more like the Christian left.
Yeah.
The idea that you served others, and that it was about how you acted, and that you shouldn't judge others. So my dad's from the South, and that wing of the family was much more like fundamentalist, and I couldn't really relate to that. But my own search took me much further beyond that. I have this I still have this Bible that I was presented when I was 9. It was a pivotal year. And the reason I kept it is because in the back of it, I think I was just learning how to swear, and it really, all the Bible stories, it all really made me mad, this whole Sunday school thing. And so I wrote in the back of it, "Fucker on the church." And like I couldn't really say, I didn't really know how to use profanity, so it says "fucker" on the church. And then I crossed it out, I tried to erase it, and then underneath it I write "excuse please," And like later I see this as just like an entirely holy document. It was like me at age 9 going like, I'm gonna find my own path with this. Like I'm gonna ask questions, and I'm gonna see where my questions take me. When I was 12, I was traveling with my family. We were going to Jamaica on a family vacation, and we were changing planes in Miami airport. And I was at this age where, you don't want to be seen with your parents. And you're like, can you drop me off around the corner? And, because, you're kind of embarrassed. And even though, like, looking back, I'm like, it's cool we're going on a family vacation to Jamaica, right? But I didn't want to be seen with my parents. So I saw a man in a saffron robe, Hare Krishna dude, in the Miami airport. And went up to talk to him.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What nationality was he?
Oh, he was an American dude,
Okay.
I'm sure, but the shaved head, the saffron
What
robe,
did you
the
ask
whole
him?
thing. Well, I didn't ask him. I walked up to him and said hello, and he was like, "Have you ever read the Bhagavad Gita?"
No way.
I was like, "Yeah, no way, man. How many 12-year-olds from the Midwest have read the Bhagavad Gita?"
Yeah.
But I talked to him about it and a little bit, and then my parents saw me talking to the Hare Krishna guy and kind of freaked out. They're like, "David," et cetera. So I grabbed the Bhagavad Gita from him and I ran off with it. And
he was handing them out.
he was,
Like
that's what they were doing. I mean, it's hard to
they still do.
It's hard to remember, listeners,
Yeah.
but there was a time you didn't have to go through security,
Yeah.
and that the airports were full of Hare Krishnas, and they were handing out copies of the Bhagavad Gita. And in fact, it was kind of a joke, actually. Hare Krishnas at the time.
Yeah.
And but my parents were totally freaked because you could see in their eyes they were like, he's gonna run away and join an ashram, which of course turned out to be true later on. But anyway, I ran off with it. So I ran off with the Bhagavad Gita, and him chasing after me, and like literally he's going, that kid stole the Bhagavad Gita. Of course he would have given it to me for free, but it's the fact that I had to grab it from him, and of course nobody cared the least. But I kept the Bhagavad Gita.
Did you read it in Jamaica?
No, I read it 20 years later.
Oh, wow.
But I held on to it.
You
For some reason or
did.
other, I held on to the
Interesting.
Bhagavad Gita. I kept it with me.
There was something about
There's
it.
something about it. When I finally opened it up, what I loved about it, the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, is the doubt of Arjuna.
Mm-hmm.
Not the great faith or the good works, but the doubt of Arjuna. And what I found was really fascinating and really compelling to me was that it said, ask questions, inquire within, inquire about the state of things, about the state of the world and your mind and your heart, and keep asking questions. That will open the door. Your doubt is what you have, so use it. wow.
Yeah. That's an eye-opener right there.
For sure.
And also, don't be attached to answers. Like,
exactly.
keep asking.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. That is actually the path of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And the path of religion seems to be to attach yourself to solutions or answers or dogma. But yoga's asking no. Don't get so comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be so sure. Every situation could be different, could mean something different with more evidence or from another point of view. Like
Perception.
And projection.
And presence.
Right. All of those things were important. Years later, after I became a professional kirtan singer, I was being interviewed for a book about kirtan, etc. And the guy was from the Hare Krishna movement. His name is Stephen Rosen. And I told him that story, about that, 12 years old, Bhagavad Gita, Miami Airport. He was like, I remember you.
No way. Seriously?
That's what he said. I'm not sure. Part of me is like, come on. He was like, no, I used to pass out Bhagavad Gitas
in the Miami
at
airport.
the Miami airport.
Holy shit, he was
Holy
the dude.
Shit. Yeah.
Wow.
Right. And he was
That's profound.
He was like, karma, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steal the Bhagavad Gita from Hare Krishna.
Boom.
Boom. Right. Come back as mantra singer. So I still don't know whether that was actually true or whether, he was just having me on.
Up.
But in any case, it's in his, it's in his book. So
interesting. Wow, that's amazing.
Right. So I realize I'm kind of zigging and zagging trying to, get to this thing, but the process of inquiry. So around the time in the blue-haired Mohawk days, I was invited to, I still don't remember who or how this happened, but...
But you left the post-production editing facility after the potato chip.
No, I'm going back and forth in time. So after, is this post-potato chip now? No, this is still pre-potato chip, okay? Because one of the things that actually at that time that they liked is that at first I was an assistant editor and then I became an editor at this post-production facility. But the fact at the time that they had a blue-haired, punk assistant,
cool.
23-year-old, assistant editor was like that. That made them the cool shop.
Yeah.
So, and the clients kind of liked it too, and so I wandered into, there was this Swami Muktananda was his name, who was giving darshan. For listeners who don't know that word, it was like darshan means to kind of like an encounter with a saint, and in a tent on the beach in Santa Monica, and I went to go meet him.
How did you hear about it?
I'm trying to remember it, to be perfectly honest. I don't know what circumstances.
But it was random.
There. It was
because
kind of
you
random.
were still punk rock.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I went there, and I walked in, and I felt immediately uncomfortable because I was not dressed for the occasion and clearly sticking out. And
which is exactly what needed to happen.
Right, I guess so. But I had one moment where I locked eyes with Muktananda. And
it was Muktananda himself?
Yeah, Muktananda himself.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it was like a year before he took samadhi.
Wow.
And I locked eyes with him and basically got the hell out. It was just way too much for me to...
Did you have this Shakti pot kind of situation?
No, I did not. Not at that time. I ran away and I went...
fear?
Yeah, I was terrified of it. And I went home and I remember I scored some Coke.
What did it make you feel like? What happened? Can you describe your feeling?
My feeling was that I had encountered some force that I was unprepared to deal with. That was the thing. I was fearful because I didn't know what it was. And I think that's...
it was out of your control.
It was out of my control. It was something I didn't understand. I didn't have words for it. And it was
scary.
Weird. They're chanting all these mantras. You could smell incense. He's wearing a ski cap and a saffron robe, and there's just all these people there, and I just felt like I stuck out and just didn't belong, and I just ran because I was like, what a mistake.
This is too much. I need an 8-ball.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Because I knew about that kind of bliss.
Okay. So,
So a few years later, his successor, Guru Mai, was in LA, and some friends of mine invited me to come meet her, and I didn't want to because I didn't want to be involved in any of these Guru things, so I refused. And was invited several times because at the time she was touring a lot, and a lot of people were coming, and anyway, I just didn't want to go. So, but a friend of mine had become involved with the City Yoga organization and was in India editing films for them, videos for them. And I was at the time, I think, working for Easy Riders Motorcycle magazine, editing video product for motorcycle people. It was another weird job I had. And as things go in ashrams, my friend had, you work with people in ashrams and you know all these people, and people can be there for 10 years, and then one day they go up to, the guru, and the guru says, okay, it's time for you to go now. And it's all, it doesn't, it can be stunning.
Random.
And it's random. It doesn't make sense. So this woman named Kamuda had lived in the ashram for 10 years and had been editing, and she knew my friend.
In the ashram, she's been editing.
In India, in Ganeshpuri in India.
What did they edit? Like?
Well, you could call it guru propaganda.
Okay.
But, I mean, they were very sophisticated at putting out talks with Guru Mai and beautifully edited things that were meant to communicate with people worldwide about meditation and the things that they were doing, and they were quite sophisticated at it. And Siddha Yoga was very respectful of like how people needed to perceive it. Like it wasn't a hippy dippy thing. They produced nice videos. People dressed very well when they went, and the people that came to first Swami Muktananda, but then especially Guru Mai, tended to be people from all different walks of life. But there was definitely a bit of a movie star contingent, and also very prosperous lawyers and people like this. And I think she understood that. Still is. Yeah. The message. In that organization. Right, but the message needs to be communicated in a way that people can receive it. Right. And there are some people that the minute they see too many love beads and too much hippy-dippy stuff, they're just like, no, that's not for me. And their message was like, no, this is for you, and so we're going to make it possible for you to do it. Anyway, Kamuda comes to LA and she needs a job, and the skill that she has, and she went up, and one day she was just told, okay, you're out of here. Go, you're done.
But she needed to be replaced, basically.
Correct. And but she came to LA. This took a while to play out, but she came to LA and she was looking for a job, and she knew my friend Janice, and who had been in the ashram. And Janice said, well, call David when you get to LA and he'll help you find a job. So she did, and I did. I knew of a job, and I just turned her on to her first job in LA. And it's just the usual kind of friend of a friend thing. That's how it works in Hollywood. And she called me up a few months later and said, I have a job for you. Thanks. Okay, what is it? And she mentioned, Guru Mai and Ganeshpuri, and, did I want to go and edit films for them?
In India.
In India. And I said, how much does it pay? And I talked to them, and the pay wasn't Hollywood standard, So
but you were up for the experience.
No, I turned it down.
You did?
Yeah, I turned it down.
Did you still have blue hair?
No, I didn't have blue hair anymore. But I turned it down. And I mean, like, this was really 9 years after the blue hair phase. Okay. And I turned it down and kind of went about my life and everything. But the funny thing is that I had been up for a bunch of jobs that would have paid really well.
In LA.
And they all fell apart, one after another. And suddenly I was broke. Like, shit, what am I going to do? And so I thought, oh, yeah, there's that weird job in India. I'll just call them and see if I can still do that. So I called them, and they said, yes, because the way I got the job is she told them that I had appeared in her meditation as the person who was meant to go. And I believe her that I did, And it was a weird way to get a job, hi, you appeared in my meditation, and so do you want to go to India? But
they were buying it.
Well, that's how they work. That's how it works, That's how it works. And no, but I mean, I had skills as an editor.
Yeah, of course. Were you still making music on the side, by the way?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Just to
as a side note.
just to keep the thread going. You were a good interviewer. Just keep him on
No,
point.
I'm just wondering because we're like drifting off into the editing, and I'm like,
but it's all. I'm going to land the plane here in a moment. And,
so you took it.
So they said. So I called them up, and they said,
Did they pay for your ticket?
we still need the editor, but we need you now. Can you be here in a week? And I said, sure. So I FedExed them my passport. They got me a visa right away because they got those kinds of connections. And they sent me a ticket. And a week later, I was on a plane.
Where's that
to
ashram?
India. It's in Maharashtra, about 3 hours outside of Mumbai, or Bombay, as they called it at the time. And I remember arriving in India, like all dressed in black. With like at the time I had a ponytail and an earring, and this was my sort of like 1990s look.
Your new shtick.
and I got there and like that was just like so wrong, But once I got rid of the black clothes, my job was to edit a series of videos about yoga and yoga philosophy for beginners. And the reason that they hired me to do it was because I was a beginner. And the idea was that I would experience everything.
How ideal.
As a beginner. So they told me nothing.
That's fantastic.
Right. It turned out to be totally great because I didn't go as a devotee or a believer. I didn't go there expecting anything but a paycheck.
Fresh,
I was totally fresh. And so I was able to perceive all these practices with completely fresh eyes.
Yeah.
And what overcame my doubt was the experience.
Yeah. It's always the experience.
Right.
Because you can intellectualize or you can take in knowledge, but if you don't experience it,
right,
it is nothing, you know. It is just
theoretical. It's theoretical.
Yeah.
And yoga is meant to be practical.
Yeah.
And so for me to, sit down and chant was an overwhelmingly beautiful experience because first of all, it felt nonsensical, like an invented language.
And you feel awkward?
No, I felt familiar.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Oh, of course, because of the monster
when
songs.
I was a kid, the monster songs and all the wordless stuff, I was like, oh my God, they're singing.
They're my people.
They're my people, exactly. Like, I understand this. Like
I've belonged all along.
Right, but like before, no one could sing along with my wordless stuff because they didn't know it. But this was, they were like, well, here are the words, And the words, without even explaining them to me, I could understand them. I could understand them in terms of their impact, their emotional feeling.
Vibrational kind of?
Sure, because the first mantra I learned was Om Namah Shivaya, okay? And I learned it because I was sitting in a tent with like 1,000 people chanting it. And, you're doing it for like an hour, and at some point, your mind starts going, what does this mean? And, I've been told very, very great mantra, everything in this mantra, And so I just tried to encounter it, and see what it was.
But with our Western minds, we always want to say, but what does it really mean? What does it translate to?
But they weren't telling me, so I had to like listen to the sounds.
They did it on purpose.
On purpose, yeah. And I think, other people, it's just you walk into this thing and of course people explain Om Namah Shivaya all the time, but not, I walked in a way where it was already being chanted.
You
and
were
it was just like,
experiencing
I was
it.
experiencing it. So what I got from it was that the sound, was already meaningful. Like I just started listening to it. And first they had everybody speak it, randomly. So there was a kind of like spoken word kind of John Cage piece about it, which I could relate to that too. It was like, okay, well, all right. So you take a phrase and you keep repeating it in overlapping patterns and you see what happens.
Here's the artist from
it
film school coming back.
Exactly. It was kind of the same as like
a parallel universe.
Exactly. It was like Violin Phase by Steve Reich, except for with a mantra, And it was really cool because all of these sounds kind of rubbed against one another, and they created other sounds, and you could hear like everything from like little bits of conversation that seemed intelligible to like sounds like an airplane taking off or tea kettle whistling or ocean waves crashing or whatever. It was
all inclusive.
It was really fascinating and really super trippy. Then we sang it, and as I listened to the sounds, I went, okay, so O is a sound of wonder and openness, and is a sound that I make
Yummy.
when I feel right, and
like relief,
exactly,
like all of these feelings.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. Right.
That's
And
so
then you
cool.
keep going through it, and you're like, okay, and then again, and then shh. Right? Yeah, see, now you're communicating to me. Even with these sounds, you're going,
Yeah.
So we can have a perfectly nice conversation. I can go, oh, and you go, shh. Yes. See, we've already said something,
Next.
Right? Then shh.
Eee.
Right? Which you already laugh when you sing it.
It's unbelievable.
Right? It feels like freedom. It's like children
nice
playing.
How you're kind of dissecting it.
Right.
Here.
And then which is super buzzy. Like when little boys or kids play with like trucks and stuff, they go it's a sound of like energy and vibration.
Yeah.
And it feels and if you let that V go on, hey listeners, try it at home. It's fun. Do it for a little while and it gets you really, really buzzed. It's just like right away. Like,
well, that is also something that you do in yoga with these single sounds, where you create that buzz in your head and stuff in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Does things in your brain.
Right. And I realized it was like, okay, so this mantra is 1, trying to get me buzzed.
Yeah.
2, it's creating a feeling of freedom. It's also creating a feeling
soothing,
of quiet. Shh. It's creating a feeling of release, a feeling of connection and closeness. Wonder. Right.
All of that.
All of it. All in these sounds. And I was like, whoa, this is an amazing thing. And I just wanted to chant those things because you would get lost in it.
Yeah.
And what they were saying. And this is the opposite of punk in a sense, as opposed to an assertion of like individuality. It was saying, why don't you let go of that story? Why don't try and change the chant, just sing it. Just get lost in this wave of sound. And this wave of sound builds slowly. And the repetition at some point, your mind just surrenders to it and you get transported in it. And as it gets faster and faster and faster, you get more and more excited. And it's kind of like you're like surfing this music or something, and it propels you into this place of intense
ecstasy.
Yes.
I can say that from experience because we've chanted many, many times together, and it was, my experience started much later than yours, but I felt the same way.
Right.
I felt like awkward at first, like, oh, really? And, we're all like kind of a little self-conscious, and then when it hits, you just get lost in it, and it's that's it.
Precisely. And that was it was such a relief to me in a way to be musical in an ecstatic way with a group of people and to kind of lose the boundaries of myself, to actually be free of Dave for a little while turned out to be a great thing, because the problem with us in the West is that we're constantly like trying to assert ourselves, our individual self. I am. It's one reason why sometimes I'm a little bit have a kind of arm's length relationship with social media, because everybody's just out there going, I am. Like, this is who me. And the purpose of the music that I mostly have made is one of like letting go of that message.
And it's like Ram Dass says, becoming nobody. It's like we always try our entire life to be somebody, and even somebody better. Like we always want to top it.
Right.
And we're enough. We're okay.
We're enough.
Just the way we are.
And all these roles that we are occupying are temporary
They're
things.
all these stories that we kind of create.
Right.
It's like,
Right. There's a poet I once read. I think her name is Muriel Rukeyser. When she died, the 1930s or something. But she wrote something that said, "The world isn't made of atoms, it's made of stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's right. You know, that it's the world is a sum total of all the projections and all of our experiences, all of the stories, all the things that we're saying about ourselves. And some of them are true, but a lot of them are just another
nonsense.
Or a way of just trying to make a buck.
But the good news is that we can make up a new story every day if we have, you know, if we're conscious about that.
Right.
This is a story.
Right. Well, this is where we start to, you know, to flash forward to where maybe this conversation will go is into neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
You know, but the thing is, in order to like get rid of old stories that aren't serving you, you have to, you know, make up new ones, I guess, or find better stories.
And you have to become aware of that these stories are not serving you, and that they are stories.
Exactly.
So it's a little more complex.
It's way complex.
Yeah.
And in the process of trying to lose the bonds of your ego is really, really difficult, and it requires practices that are stronger than your ego.
And the doctrines and the whole conditioning that we've been equipped with, you know, from our ancestors, from our education, from our upbringing.
Yeah, exactly.
Our culture.
All those things are in it. But yet the practice of chanting itself was transportive, and it seemed to affect everybody the same. You know, it cut across, like whether you were Indian or German or Australian or whatever, it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
And there was this feeling that you were somehow deeply connected to the people next to you. Like I felt chanting next to people something like love in a kind of universal way, not like I want something from you, or I want to fuck you, or I want to get a job from you, or whatever, you know. It was just something
just
like
chanting together.
Yeah.
But don't you feel that's happening in any type of music as a universal language in a way?
Yes. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about it, is that
that it hits a nerve and it brings people together, and it's, you know, they can be whatever artist, American artist, rock and roll, and there can be a person in China and in all over the world, they can kind of feel it in the same way, even if they have no clue what they're singing.
Right, music turns out to be like the operating system.
Yeah, because it's the vibration, it's the frequency, and that kind of just hits you.
Yeah, I mean, years later, you know, I guess we're jumping back and forth in time here, but my mother died of Alzheimer's a few years ago, and it was a long, strange trip, you know, to watch, you know, all of my process through yoga was like about kind of observing how my personality had assembled itself and asking questions about like what is the mind and what is the self. And then I watched my mother, who in so many ways, well, literally created me, but also in terms of my mind, created and kind of focused, you know, like this whole thing, sing to your monsters, you know, this comes from my mother.
Well, there's good and bad that you get, you know, on your path with them. But also I realize the older I get, when I see myself react, oh, this is something my mother would do or something. And then there's some things when you work on your own personal growth that you undo it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the ones you...
So my mother, in the course of Alzheimer's, was undoing, you know, like I'm watching her kind of in a sense, like her mind crumbled into sand of some sort, you know, and her ability to respond in words became very, very limited. She recognized me till the end, but what I would do is when I would go visit her in her care facility in Chicago, and I tried to go 4 or 5 times a year, and there was a grand piano in the lobby, and so I would sit down next to her and basically make up little songs, and music made her come back. Like emotionally we could connect in the space of music.
That's
she
powerful.
Became my mother again in a way that I could grasp emotionally.
Because it hit a nerve somewhere of remembrance.
Some deep remembrance.
I think
beyond memory.
Yeah,
beyond memory.
Yeah, but I think that's the frequency thing, that the cells or whatever this little soul that sits inside of us. I don't know. I can't even put a word to it.
I can't put words to it either, but I knew that it was the thing that I could...
Where you could connect.
Yes, because I couldn't have a conversation with her anymore, but somehow in singing she could speak. So I would sing something to her, and then she would sing back to me.
Wow.
And so the only way that we could really have a conversation would be to sing. And the words that would come out of her, like I feel like I missed a potentially great art project, but of course it's your mother, so you're not thinking about it that way. But the stuff that toward the end that would come out of her, she'd be like, the insides, the outside, the outsides, the inside. And she'd be saying stuff like this to me, and like sort of messages from the other side or something like that. I have some videos of us singing together. Like I just kind of turn it on, and that musical thing, whatever music is, it made us both present to one another. It cut across like the imperfect circuitry of her mind and allowed some deeper connection,
like
to
almost
be
mystical
expressed.
experience.
It was
in
mystical,
a way.
you
And
know?
that's the beauty about it, that we don't know that there's.
Right.
I mean, we both know because we both kind of a
Right.
little neuroscience nerds.
Yeah.
That the brain is the most like mysterious thing,
In the
still
most complicated structure that we know of, you know? And I've seen people in nursing homes in wheelchairs get up and dance. You know, music somehow allows something to function that otherwise gets lost. And if you think of it, I mean, right now my theory is that, you know, we all use, or most people use computers, and there's an operating system, and then you have all these other programs that operate on top of it. Okay, so think of it as like
software.
Yeah, the software. Think of like our personalities and all this stuff. Think of that as the software. But music seems to somehow be the operating system. And
That's
like,
an interesting way to look at it.
it all sits on top of that because everybody everywhere relates to and responds to music. It cuts across cultures. And you might, if you say you're playing Iranian music with its Quran, like quarter tone notes, or gamelan music with its 7 or 5 tone scales that are kind of between the Western things, at first you might be kind of adjust yourself to it, but you're still moved by it. And it doesn't require special knowledge to be moved by it. You don't have to study classical music to like listen to, you know, a classical symphony and be like thrilled or brought to tears by it. It directly is, at least I'll say, it's the operating system of our emotional lives.
I think it's bigger than an operating system.
Okay.
Almost.
I mean, on some level,
If I think about it, like in a way, I mean.
No, I mean sometimes I
because
think
the operating system is something also created.
Yeah, we
to
may be
function in a certain format.
Yeah, we may
and
be.
I think we're like this. What we're talking about goes beyond any format.
Yeah, we may be touching in areas that actually words can't get to.
Yeah, that's the beauty. That's what I love.
That's what music does. So I realized, you know, in chanting mantras, that what I had been doing as a child was I was communicating in a language that was purely emotional and spiritual. I'll use a metaphor, like if for anybody who's a photographer, and if you're using a, you know, an old school lens as opposed to like your iPhone, part of making a good picture has to do with controlling the depth of field. Okay, where's the point of focus in the frame? You know, if you're taking a portrait of somebody, the focus is on the face, and you're blurring the background because otherwise it just makes a better picture to like say this is what it is. And so good photographers are constantly playing with the depth of field and how much light is on, you know, et cetera, to create that depth of field. It seems to me that things are happening to us on an intellectual, emotional, and spiritual plane, but we can't keep it all in focus at one time. And even if we could, it wouldn't make a very good picture. So we have to select. So for me, songs I was writing were, the depth of field was focused on the emotional and spiritual level. If I would have put it into English words, it would have not, I wouldn't have been able to have the emotional content that I intended. So, you know, here was then a form of music in India that was focused on purely the emotional and spiritual content, and that was transportive, not only personally and internally, but transportive across cultures, because later, once I made a bunch of records and became a professional singer of mantras, I've played in, I don't know, I think something like 30 different countries at this point now, and often regularly. So I can go from playing shows in Shanghai or Beijing or Guangzhou and like go to play in Zurich or Munich or Berlin and Barcelona. The music, the experience of chanting is the same. it doesn't really matter what people's first language is. We're all singing in a language that is purely emotional, and that, at least with Indo-European languages, is in fact the root language of those languages. I mean, the grammar of Sanskrit and German are very close to one another.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah, there's the same effective like Dieter Das, and you know, and the same love of these very, very long, you know, conjunct words, you know, compound words, but also the same placement of the verb and things like this. And so it doesn't have as much relationship to China, which, I mean, those languages come from a different root, but nonetheless, it turned out
it's easy to chant the.
It's easy to chant. You can
for
chant
any
You can chant in Shanghai just the same as Stockholm. So it. I guess my music has been focused on those kinds of transportive experiences, and I was never really sure what to do about words. Okay, so. But which I'm trying to make a mental note to get back to that in a moment. But to kind of wrap up the ashram story here. So I'm chanting and working every day with different swamis and learned people. And we're investigating different topics. And that was fascinating to me. I'm meditating, practicing yoga, physical asanas, chanting, and it was a tremendous learning process for me. You know, like really, I was paid to just like learn Eastern philosophy, which I'm still like super grateful for.
And like once in a while, you were editing the things.
No, I mean I was editing because part of it would be like they'd be like, okay, here's a talk that Swami Muktananda gave in 1975 on the topic of self-effort and grace, you know, or, you know, the first talk that they had me edit was a talk on Dharma, and that was a talk that Guru Mai gave in Los Angeles, California, that I was invited to and refused to go to. And it was kind of like the ashram was like, see, so...
I have to say, I see like a little thing here from the universe, like it was like... The dude at the Miami airport, and here, you know, when you showed up with your blue hair, Muktananda, and the job, it was like calling you.
Right, and it's so
clearly.
But it's only sometimes looking back at our lives that you can see how it all falls into place, you know? So so that was a profound experience, and I went to India I really didn't know what you did in an ashram or how I was going to entertain myself. So I brought this little toy Chinese accordion, because at one point I had a loft downtown in the toy district in Los Angeles, and I bought this like $20 like little accordion, and it was really cool to play and super light and easy to transport. And I brought an Appalachian dulcimer because it was also small and easy to take with me. So I took those two instruments with me to India. And I would sit across the road from the ashram in the place where I was staying at first, and play along with the chants, and then make up my own chants, you know. And so I would sit there, and as I learned more mantras, I would make up chants with the mantras. And people would come up to me and go, "Where'd you learn that chant?" And I was like, "Oh, I wrote it." And they're like, "You can't do that." And my response is, "I think I just did." You know, like, no, the chants, they come from the sages in antiquity, you know, like, oh, so all this yoga is about like nobody in the modern day can themselves be a portal of ecstasy, or, you know, like I thought we were all here to, you know, find our way towards some kind of freedom, you know, and so I started to investigate what the tradition was, and it turns out that the singers have always invented the songs. The mantras, you know, are metaphors in many ways for different ways that we experience the divine, whether it's, you know, fierceness or sweetness or attraction or even repulsion or obstacles. There's all these different, this whole beautiful psychology of.
But how did you come up with the mantras? But by knowing the mantras you were chanting at the ashram?
Yeah, sure.
And then you just
you just be like, okay,
picked and chose and
you know,
put them
Govinda
together.
Jaya Jaya, or, you know, Gopala Jaya Jaya, Radha Ramana Hari, Govinda Jaya Jaya is clearly a mantra, and you hear all kinds of different versions about it. So I would just make up another one, you know. When my job ended, at that point, I felt like I was deep in a process that wasn't complete. And I really didn't know how I was going to deal with Hollywood or the whole thing when I came back. But nonetheless, my visa was expiring and I had to go home, And so I asked if I could stay. And they said, yeah, go home and, get your affairs in order and then you could come back. And only then I realized that they'd been sending money to my, American bank account for many, 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 many months and, 9 months or something. And I had plenty of money in the bank. I could just go back to India. And this time, when I went back the second trip, I think there was maybe 2 months in between the trips. And
how was it coming back? Was it like a weird culture shock?
It was total culture shock.
That's how I feel every time I come back from India.
There was all this advertising and
$5 for Starbucks coffee. I could live here for a week.
Right. Yeah.
It's like ridiculous.
And it was just like this culture of desire, in a way that wasn't taking
this
you
wanting,
anywhere good.
Yeah.
Whereas India was telling you to look at the source of your desire.
Yeah.
Not to look at the object of the desire, but to look at the source.
Yes.
So it was an entirely different way of looking at things. And it was shocking to come back to America. And I just didn't really want to be here.
So it pulled you back to go back to India?
Yeah, it made me, I'm sold
because
my
otherwise
car
you would have
and,
gone back to the Harley Davidson film
whatever.
potato chip world.
But I couldn't see that happening.
See, this funny how it was like like this, and this, had you taken that path, where would you be now,
I don't know. I'd probably, I don't know.
Maybe you would have pink hair by now or something.
Maybe I would have had a heart attack and I wouldn't be here.
Right.
But it was strange to come home and actually feel at sea and at odds with the culture that I grew up in. And I really just wanted to go back, and I felt like the process that I'd been involved with had sort of peeled a few layers of,
definitely
skin or shell off of me, and I needed to go back there. So
and
I did.
Probably more curiosity, because you just mentioned you felt it was like an unfinished business.
Yeah, and
within you.
Yeah, it was definitely unfinished. Well, it's still unfinished business.
Oh, it never finishes. That's the good thing.
Yeah, yes, that's the thing. At some point, you have to give up the goal, and you start to just approach the way of it.
Yeah.
And but
once I have this, then I'm happy.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. Yes. Well, yes. We keep having all these conditions, and which.
And the wanting never stops.
And the wanting never stops.
Yeah.
So
it's good to have desires, though,
of
with good intentions, because otherwise we kind of stay kind of complacent and we're not moving forward.
Yeah. Right. Of course, because, we're in human bodies and desires are going to be there. You're going to desire to eat something, and if you don't, you'll die eventually.
Or even the desire to learn something new, or to, work on your personal growth, or whatever it is.
But what India did, or what yoga philosophy did, is change the framing device. And instead of saying, what do I want, I would say, why do I want? Or what is this expressing? And if I'm angry, I started to understand that there was probably a desire that was unmet,
or an expectation that was that created disappointment, because that's what they always do.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it helped a lot in terms of seeing myself. When I went back to India, the people in ashrams, who, for listeners who aren't familiar with what it is spiritual communities. Everything has to be done. People have to pick up the garbage, and the dishes have to be washed, and the onions have to be chopped, etc., etc. Right. And you start to learn to just you start to learn to surrender to whatever the simplicity of what that activity is.
And it's humbling too, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, but often they would ask people to do things that you'd be like, I'm not qualified for, or somebody comes in with a degree in astrophysics or whatever, and they're like, and there's can you work in the garden, or can you pick up the garbage, or can you clean toilets, or something like that. And so the high and mighty are laid low, and often people who either don't think much of themselves, or don't have skills, are put in positions of are put in charge, which creates a kind of crazy topsy-turvy world. And but you start to see the arbitrariness of things, and that's what's beautiful. So they asked me to go teach school. Ashram had a school for both ashram kids and village kids. And I said, I'm not qualified. You know, I mean, I've never taught school.
What were you supposed to teach them?
Well, this was the whole thing. I was like, what am I supposed to teach?
Yeah.
They were like, well, whatever you're interested in.
Oh.
Okay.
That's better.
That's better. So I'm teaching a bunch of 9-year-olds and, you know, 4th graders, basically. And it was up to me to invent the curriculum.
I like it.
I loved it too, because basically it meant that I could kind of encounter, I just had to put myself in like, okay, I remember what it was like to be 9.
Did you think like, I really want to give them something good? Like,
I wanted to engage their curiosity.
Yes,
I realized that's what
the
it was
wonder.
about. It was about engaging wonder.
Yeah.
And they were interested in
And
awe.
awe.
And that's what I spent the rest of the time doing.
Great.
But what started every day is there was a harmonium and a mridangam, which is an Indian drum, and the kids knew all these chants. And so the way that you begin the school day in an ashram is you chant. So really, that was the first time I had an opportunity to sit with a harmonium and actually, aside from making up my own versions on the accordion, you know, across the road, or sitting in the chants that other musicians were leading, that was the first time that I sat with a harmonium
and a group of people.
And had to lead the chant. But the kids knew the chant. So I was supposedly there teaching these 9-year-olds, but actually they'd grown up in the ashram or around this stuff, so they were teaching me the chant. So people say, how did you learn to like chant mantras? I mean, the real answer is like a bunch of 9-year-olds taught me, you know, and we would just sing it every day.
I see a pattern here
I
with
see a
the
pattern too.
9-year-old.
Right, I
And
know. There's like
did
a
that
pivotal moment
transport
there.
you back to your 9-year-old
Well, it
little
did.
Dave?
It did. And I realized it's like, oh, okay. Like the 9-year-old Dave could, you know, still existed in the 30-year-old Dave, and I realized I could meet them in that place, but with, you know, obviously years more awareness, self-awareness, and knowledge. And so it was a beautiful thing. One of my favorite projects that we did is we would go out in the rice paddies and pick up bones. Because in the hot season in India, you know, things die.
Sure.
And, you know, dogs gnaw on the bones and everything. And so you could go out in the rice paddies in the dry season and, like, pick up water buffalo bones and cow bones and things like this, right? So we would bring them back and bury them and then study how, like, worms and insects cleared things off. And the kids are, of course, not at all thinking this is weird. Adults, when they found out about it, were like horrified, you know, but the kids were like, oh, that's cool, you know. and we would then clean the bones, and we made musical instruments out of the bones.
What do you make?
Marimbas, mostly.
What's a marimba?
You know, like a xylophone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Because the bones have a hollowness to them.
Really?
Yeah.
What does that
We
sound
made some
like?
trumpets, you know, like
No
you
way.
could, because you could blow through them and, you know, kind of cleaned it out, and you could blow into the bones and it made a sound. But mostly we would take bones of different lengths and then make kind of a wooden thing and tie them with rope and everything.
So you got very creative there.
We got very creative, and we made musical instruments out of bones. And like
Wow.
that was a thing I did with the kids in India.
That's awesome.
It was so cool.
That's really cool.
And I learned how to chant, you know. And so when I came back to America, you know, things were just different for me. And I did some film editing work because that's how I knew how to support myself. But the yoga movement was beginning to explode.
What
in
year
Los
did you come
Angeles.
back then? Is this after the second trip?
Yeah, this is after the second trip.
Was that the 90s?
Yeah, it was the early 90s.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, still kind of going back to the editing thing, but it was different for me. I wasn't really working on commercials so much. I was editing a lot of independent movies that no one ever saw, and, you know, things like this. And, you know, but I started writing things, you know, in India that ultimately over those years became my first record, which is called Brink. And I was asked, how did I get involved in this chanting thing? That my friend Janice, who somehow was the conduit to Kamuda and ending up the ashram, she had kind of moved out of Siddha Yoga, and she'd fallen in love with another woman, a Danish woman named Maya, and they were around this other guru named Ma Jaya Satabhagavati. And Ma is
That's
like...
a mouthful.
Yes, but you just called her Ma. And Ma was Jewish from Brooklyn.
Oh, my God.
And tattooed and like a devotee of Kali, and like
Oh, wow.
And like And she had a whole mission where like Siddha Yoga was all super regal and, you know, very like this beautiful Indian mannerisms. And Ma was like loud, told dirty jokes, and had a culture of service and ministry to people who normally didn't have access to spiritual organizations. In around 94 or so, I remember that AIDS was raging.
Right.
And a lot of those people were not welcome in churches and places. There were definitely people who needed to be ministered to, and conventional religion was refusing them a place. And Ma loved them and went to them. And she would have these satsangs, these spiritual conversations, and for people that were, you know, either very ill or like leather daddies or people, transsexuals, etc. And
so it was a community kind of.
It was a whole community. And anyway, she was going to do, this is before gay marriage, she was marrying Janice and Maya, and in a spiritual way, and they asked me to come and meet Ma because they wanted me to play for their wedding.
What, just a quick question. What did make Ma a guru? Was she a self-proclaimed guru? Or how do you become a guru?
Well, this is a big question. Listeners probably want to know, how do you become a guru? You know, well, either another guru makes you the guru, or there's a long tradition in India of people that suddenly, like, some channel opens up.
Because I was never into the guru thing when I started my spiritual journey.
Hey, I had a lot of resistance to it, and I still do, but, you know.
Anyways,
so
that's a whole other conversation.
Ma apparently was married to a truck driver named Sal in Brooklyn, and she started having visions of Bhagavan Nityananda, who was a saint in India, who also like appeared to have just like sprung up from the ground. You know, he didn't have a teacher, but he was Muktananda's teacher, and the teacher of a bunch of other teachers. He spoke very little, and apparently his presence was quite spellbinding. You know, like you could fall into meditation just to sit with him. Anyway, so she started having these experiences with Nityananda, and eventually left her husband and started teaching. I don't know how this all starts, but she met Ram Dass, and they were apparently buddies for a while, and she famously seduced Ram Dass.
Wow.
He wrote an article called Egg on My Face, which, you know, your listeners can Google to like talk about the whole experience.
I have to check that out.
Yes, because he repudiated it, but she definitely had some shakti, you know, some energy. So anyway.
And if anybody would have known that, it would be Ram Dass.
Oh, yeah. No, apparently they had a
He's
potent
the only
connection.
one where I had like a kind of a guru experience when I had darshan with him, where I felt like, whoa, you know.
Yeah, he was a powerful being.
Yeah.
A really powerful, you know.
Yeah.
And
I would have never thought that. I found it awkward when I was in Maui to stand in line and get my mala and bow in front of him and in front of Maharaji. And when it happened, it was experience.
Right.
You know, I was like, that's it. Okay.
Right.
Good.
It puts aside all of your
everything,
all of your doubts, all of your resistances, and
absolutely.
it's just, and you're just like, you're thinking like, I'm not this sort of person.
Yes.
You know, and yet there it happens.
Yeah.
So, you know, apparently they had some kind of, you know,
interesting
experience together, and but she started having devotees, and part of it is because her message was just really focused on service, and service of the kind of people that you just didn't see in doctor, lawyer, movie star crowds, you know. And so
the
I went
underdog.
So I went to go meet her, and she was giving some darshan at this Hollywood Presbyterian church at the corner of Franklin and Highland in Hollywood, which is a beautiful building. And so I went there to meet her, and this guy Bhagavan Das was chanting for her, but he didn't show up that night, and she was mad.
Surprise!
Surprise! Apparently they had some argument, and so Bhagavan Das wasn't showing up. So Ma, in her unmistakable voice, goes, "Is there anyone here who can lead kirtan?" You know, and a bunch of people pointed at me because I was playing around in people's living rooms and, privately and at the City Yoga Center in LA. I during that time between India and the late 1990s when I got involved in playing in yoga studios, I was largely playing either around City Yoga or privately, but what I was mostly doing was volunteer work, teaching meditation and yoga and leading chants in the prison system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was, my regular gig was at Terminal Island.
Did you just look for that, or did they look for
It was
you?
offered as I was starting to have trouble with some aspects of the City Yoga organization because, it's a thing about guru movements is that they're organized around a genuine experience that is fully ecstatic, but yet it's a lot of human beings with their projections and their stuff and hierarchies and all that stuff. And there's a point where it just gets stuffy in there. And so I was starting to have some issues with the organization, not with the teaching, but with the organization. And this came up that maybe I would be interested in teaching meditation in the prisons. And I thought, that's another way of languaging meditation.
But was there an organization that? Because
yes,
I taught yoga also actually was supposed to be in prison, but then they placed me in a school for children who basically got kicked out of any school. It's like for the how would you say that, for the difficult whatever children. It was madhouse.
I'm sure.
Completely
and I'm
bananas.
Sure, but yet, you never know. Sometimes things can get through.
Yeah, but I was interested in that too because I was same. Although I was a student in the yoga studios, I also had a problem a little bit with the organization.
As one does.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it turns out
and as a teacher,
the best things to do is then when you have to teach, you suddenly start to realize what you actually know. And it's definitely, for anybody who's ever done that, like an experience of humility too, because you're like, oh my God, I'm not worthy.
Yes.
And what do I really know?
Teaching is the best teacher.
For sure. And then you have to confront some people that are way alternative. And I was like, okay, I'm not I don't know if I'm butch enough to, handle this kind of situation. But, the funny thing is that, I taught at also at Lompoc and out in Corona and at a state prison, and I led a kirtan on the very same stage. Now I'm forgetting, at Folsom Prison.
Wow!
The same
you
stage
and Johnny Cash.
The same stage.
Wow!
With a full inmate band, rock band backing me.
Holy
It was
shit!
amazing.
That's awesome.
It was amazing. I went in with a tabla player and a mridangam player, and harmonium, and we had inmate drum set, guitar, electric guitar,
How did
and
the
bass.
prisoners react to that?
Ecstatically.
Really?
It was so cool.
Wow.
And what I found is that, a lot of people are in prison for, somehow or another they've been involved with drugs. And, so I thought, okay, I'll just consider them bliss seekers. And prison is a place where you have plenty of time to reflect and plenty of time to actually engage in disciplined practices. And that was interesting to encounter. Like, some of these people were way more serious about yoga than anybody I ever met in an ashram.
I bet.
Because people often in ashrams, it's like when they get tired of it or bored of it, they just go back to their lives, But if you're in a prison, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And if you're going to get out, you're only going to get out inside, And so I found it really, really riveting to teach meditation to these people, in part because I had to find another language. Because if you go in with all your flowery New Age stuff, they're just they're not interested. They'll either confront you directly on it or more likely just walk out, or turn their back on you or whatever. So I had to learn to speak a different kind of language with them, which was really
For sure.
great. And
I had too with these kids. It was
of course.
Crazy.
Of course.
Yeah.
And I think, yoga has continued to have to learn to speak a new language.
Yeah.
I mean, it's learned a new one to speak in the West.
Yeah.
And because it does feel different here than it does, in India.
For sure.
But anyway, so that's what I was doing with chanting and stuff at the time. And anyway, so Ma's like, can anyone here lead kirtan? And so I did. And, and rocked the house. And I went up to meet her afterwards. And she was like, you're my new kirtan wala. I'm taking you on the road.
Wow.
And it wasn't a question.
Yeah.
It was,
you're hired.
It was like, you're hired.
Yeah.
And you go over and talk to, Swami, I forget, whatever, and Swami Krishna Priya or whatever. And, and she'll work it out with you. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going over to, and so she took me on the road.
But you were game.
I was game. Yeah, why not? I mean, come on. It's interesting. This crazy guru is now just hiring me to chant Sanskrit mantras. Is way better than working on some of the crap that I was, like
on the independent films
that weren't going anywhere,
Yeah.
And so she takes me on the road, and I remember the first gig was at the Cannabis Buyers Club in the Castro in San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
And this was before, just when medical marijuana, it wasn't even really quite, it was, I want to say it was 94, maybe 95.
Was it already?
It wasn't legal yet, but the beginning of
they
the
were
medical
progressive in San Francisco because of the gay community and the AIDS crisis.
Yeah, and because of the AIDS crisis. And they were like, no, this is medicine.
Right.
And so there was kind of a civil disobedience thing, and they were... I forget when medical marijuana actually became allowed in California.
Too, I forgot.
But in any case, it was
early
way
2000s.
Yeah, maybe, but it was way advanced guard on this thing.
Yeah.
And I remember like sitting in this yoga studio, or no, not did we play? No, it wasn't a yoga studio because we had played some yoga studios, but no, the Cannabis Buyers Club was it in the Castro? I think it was in the Castro. Either that or it was in the Tenderloin. And
sounds so chic, the Cannabis Buyers Club.
Right, but it was really grotty, it was not a nice place, but that's where you had to put these things. And and Ma, was like, have you met your guitar player? And I was like, no, I didn't know I have a guitar player. She's like, meet Arlo. I'm like, Arlo? What even, you mean Arlo? And she was like, yeah, Arlo Guthrie. He's very famous. You know? Yeah. And so like, now I'm like, it's like Arlo Guthrie walks in with like the full head of hair and everything. I'm not kidding, And I've got this mridangam player from Arizona, and me and Arlo Guthrie led kirtan in the Cannabis Buyers Club. And the whole thing is like people came in and they were like, everybody was stoned. I was stoned. And the only thing is
Arlo?
I think he'd been stoned for several decades. And
how was he?
He was cool. He was cool. I think that was the only gig we actually played together, but he was a devotee of Ma's.
Wow.
And showed up for that.
That's awesome.
And I remember they said, please extinguish your smoking materials. The mother is coming in the room. So everybody puts out their joints, and she comes in and gives darshan. And so we would do things like that. Yeah. And play in places where it's like all of a sudden I've got a crowd of like people in transition from one gender to another, and I'm not sure where they started or what direction they're going in, and people who genuinely were ill and in need of actual unconditional love and service. And there was something so real about her. I mean, it was crazy, the whole scene, but there was something really, really like authentic about what was going on.
Sounds like it.
So some years later, so I'm still playing for her, from time to time. I mean, it wasn't like a permanent gig. It was a tour or two and, like this, and then sporadically here and there. And but a yoga studio in LA called Yoga Works had opened up in I encountered in 1997. They asked me to come and be the house band playing kirtan, and Mati Ezrati, who ran it and who recently passed away was really a visionary.
Yeah,
she
truly
invented the modern yoga studio. Really, Yoga Works did teacher trainings where they taught people rigorously both the Iyengar and the Ashtanga methods. They taught yoga philosophy, and her idea is that she wanted a yoga school that explored all these different aspects of yoga.
And it was very solid.
It was totally solid. Yeah. She started marketing yoga teachers like movie stars, which was also a stroke of marketing genius, because there were a lot of people that were teaching there who are super famous now. That
we all know.
Yeah, that it was Mati whose eye said,
Yeah,
one,
sure.
you've got something, and two, I know how to, create a market for you.
It was kind of an era that's almost over, don't you think?
It is now, but it was like the Haight-Ashbury of the yoga movement. It
I
really
was there.
Yes, I know you were. That's when we met.
Yeah.
And so I was the house band at Yoga Works, leading kirtans there and playing for different spiritual teachers who came through and different yoga teachers. And that was fascinating because it was no longer around a particular guru. It was open to all comers, and people were invited to take part in mantra chanting and meditation as part of yoga practice. And it was meant to widen. It was meant to widen the conversation and the audience. And
the sadhana.
And the sadhana. Yeah. And sadhana being, listeners unfamiliar with Sanskrit terms, the process of essentially hardships that you go through in order to know yourself better and to open the pathway of yoga within you. I guess that's an okay definition.
I like it.
Okay. But it does imply that there is always going to be a struggle with self, with your body, with your mind primarily, and that you should get used to it because that's what's happening, and that you should find it meaningful. And
dive into it instead of run away from it.
Yes, embrace that thing.
Yeah.
And so that was actually a really formative time because they were giving all kinds of workshops with teachers, and it was really, more than anything, a community was forming in Venice and Santa Monica around yoga in that period of time, and it was a really powerful community. I mean, it's helpful in LA. LA has a long, long history of spiritual teachers coming here, and I think it's my analysis is that you have a sizable community of people that have not only a fair amount of money, but also a lot of time on their hands. Right. And this is a place where you come and you ask from Hollywood, you're like, I want, and Hollywood says no. Like refusal is something, and rejection is something that people in Hollywood have to get very, very used to. And even people who subsequently became very famous, like everybody who has their stories about all the ways they were rejected.
But it also always attracted people like, Yogananda, or, first came here, or even if you talk to other people like the Kundalini whole lineage, when Yogi Bhajan died, he's apparently said to Gurmukh, like, you open a center in Hollywood, in the middle of Hollywood, not in Santa Fe.
No, because there's an appetite for it. Because here's the thing, is that...
and they need to raise the vibration.
Right. They started coming here, in really the 1920s, just as Hollywood itself was developing. But, consider the audience here, okay? Yeah. People who have had to... reckon with their desire and their vanity, and refusal can kind of break you. And rejection.
And all of that.
And you spend a lot of time in LA staring at the void.
And you're very isolated as well from the topography of the city by itself.
Yeah. And as an artist, you sit there in front of that, like, dark hole of, like, no one needs my art. Who am I? What does this mean? What's it? And in the nature of freelance life too, even whether you're an editor or a set designer or whatever, is that now first you were involved in something that was intensely felt meaningful and purposeful, and there's a whole community around it, and then the film's over, and like poof, this little world just dissolves, and there you are, and you're like, okay, I'm not doing anything. Yeah. So I think people would start going to yoga.
I think you described that really well about how LA
it's kind of
works.
Right. It's not as glamorous as people think it is.
It's like you can be there, and then all of a sudden that bubble bursts, and
it's terrifying.
Standing
actually
in the rain. Yeah, it is. It is.
And I think it was always so. And so there was an audience for spiritual teachers here, and people with time on their hands, and the interest in confronting these things. So. And there are many different cycles of it. Anyway, by the time it got to the 90s, I mean, the 60s were a cycle, of it too. But in the 90s, so now all of a sudden there's yoga studios and a yoga movement in a way that there never was before, and communities of people coming together to practice yoga and, and chant and meditate. And it was a very vital like movement and community of people, and it started to spread out. What Yoga Works did, what Monty did, is she taught teachers, and those teachers would then go open up yoga studios,
create their own teacher trainings.
Exactly.
And it was a ripple effect.
Right,
Yeah.
and it kept spreading out first over like
but
America
California
and
was
Canada.
really like instrumental in that.
Oh yeah, it was it was one of the epicenters of it. I mean, it was also going on in New York City because Sharon and David, for the Jivamukti movement were there, and there was definitely that epicenter as well.
And what's the Brazilian guy in New York too that did all that yoga poster with all the postures? An older guy.
You're not talking about Alan Finger. No. He's not Brazilian though. Yeah.
No, it was I forgot.
Okay,
anyway,
it'll come to it.
Yeah.
Right? But so, suddenly I was involved in something really intensely meaningful. Like I'd had experiences that I could bring to bear on it, and now yoga teachers are taking me to go play for their yoga classes in different cities. And so, Sean Korn or Shiva Ray or Brian Kest or Saul Ray, people like that would take me with them.
Right.
And I started this kirtan tour, and at some point, people said, hey, could you make a record? And I had been wanting to make one. And never had. And some of these songs that I'd written in India and different mantras and things found their way into it. And the first song on my first record, which is called Shiva, the song was called Shiva Hum, Shiva Hum.
I love that.
Yeah, was played everywhere all the time.
I
in
love
yoga
that
classes.
song so much.
It's still often what I open kirtans with. It became the opening mantras.
Oh, totally.
And the translation of it.
I'm expecting that actually when I go to your show.
I know. I stopped it at one point, and people were like, "What?" And I was like,
know.
"Aren't you bored of it?" And there are people like, "No."
No.
And then I realized that it helped me to empty my mind before the thing started too. And its statement of purpose.
It's almost like for you also to establish like the night.
Exactly.
That's and then it is, what is that beautiful thing you say with the wicked and stuff? Like,
the closing thing, the universal prayer at the end. Yeah.
I love that. Too.
Yeah. May the wicked become good. May the good obtain peace. May the peaceful be freed from bonds. May the freed set others free. Yeah. I now have a collection of it in a bunch of different languages. Mögen die Bösen gut werden.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it goes on like that, yeah.
But then when you traveled with those yoga teachers, it became, took on a life of its own.
It took on a life of its own, for sure. It became a tour, and all of a sudden there's a yoga tour, like yoga studios became venues, because often they were empty on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday night, and they were like, well, it's a big empty room, it's made generally wooden, and it's got a nice sound to it, and let's have music in here. So they would start having kirtan events, and I started playing all over the country, and not just in places that you would think, not just Berkeley or Boulder, but like.
Remember, I ran into you once. We were in Minneapolis at the
for
same
sure.
time,
Yes.
and it was like a minus 1,000 degrees. Or something.
Yeah, like Minneapolis or Green Bay, Wisconsin, or I played Mobile, Alabama, and and often I and some other people that I knew were the first people who had chanted in those places, and yet they were hungry for it. They were like, let's chant mantras, and a lot of people would come, so it turned into a thing. So my first album got played, and in that record, Brink, which is still out there somewhere in Spotify land, is partly Sanskrit mantras, including Shiva Hum, which ultimately that mantra, the bhajan, which the words are from Shankaracharya, who is the founder of what's called Advaita Vedanta, or non-dualism.
Right.
He's refusing to identify with any name or form. He's saying, I'm not this, I'm not that.
All is one.
All is one. My essential nature is consciousness and bliss, which is a beautiful thing to keep repeating. And but then I started to make, after that, the things happening, and people were like, well, make another record. So I made a series of kirtan records after that, solely focused on Sanskrit mantras. And I had a lot of friends at the time who were professional musicians, and there was a kind of whole scene I was involved with in Laurel Canyon. And it kind
Good
of
old Laurel Canyon.
in precisely the place, like in some of the same houses where, you know,
Jim
like
Morrison
and
and
Joni
whatnot.
Mitchell
Yeah.
and, you know, David Crosby and all these people had lived, and in like really in exactly the same spot, except for not 60s, now 90s. And I started inviting friends from this scene. There's a guy named Paul Gordon who now lives in New York City and writes Broadway musicals, but he had a collection of people that was unbelievable. Like he would hold these like Tuesday night parties in his backyard, and people would come and, you know, just meet each other, and it was such a cool scene. And
Where was I?
yeah,
That was before me.
It was before.
I
yeah,
moved
yeah.
here in '96.
Yeah. So we were all hanging out together, and I wanted to make a record of mantras, and I just knew that I needed, like, I wasn't a professional musician, but I knew a lot of them, and so I just invited them, and I was like, hey, I'm making this record, and maybe you'd be interested in playing it with me, and it's mantras, and maybe that's weird, but I invited them. And and people said yes. So some of the singers on that record, like my friend Donna DeLory had sung with, was at the time one of Madonna's backup singers,
Right.
and CeCe White was singing backup for all kinds of people. And I mean, you could look her up. She's sung with
Ben
a ton
Harper,
of people. Yeah.
all of these.
And she's like Barry White's niece and everything. They both have amazing voices.
Yeah.
And so I invited a bunch of people like that to sing with me and play on my record. So I had this whole, somehow a whole bunch of like Los Angeles studio musicians suddenly applied themselves to like making a mantra record. And we produced a particular thing that's like, my first mantra records, Japa and Mala, were like the kind of first salvo of like what I would guess I would call like the West Coast kirtan sound, you know? And subsequently, like, Donna started making records in Sanskrit.
I was just going to say,
CeCe started making records in Sanskrit.
You infected them with the mantras chanting, because they both became...
Right. The tabla player on those records was Girish, who's amazing,
yeah.
and is also now known as a mantra singer. And
Mark Gorman playing bass with Krishna Das.
Yeah. I actually introduced Mark to Krishna Das. And,
because you all played on my 40th birthday
yes,
party.
that's right. Yeah. Yes, we did. Memorably, yeah.
That is 16 years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
So shockingly.
Shockingly. But this is what was rolling, you know, at the time. And I remember a pivotal moment in this was that what actually caused those records to happen with the particular sound they had is that there's this guy, Jesse Diamond, who is Neil Diamond's son, who was really into coming to the kirtans, and he was getting married to Cheryl. I forget her name. She was on Twin Peaks at the time, and so they're having some kind of celebrity wedding, and Jesse asked me if I would come play at his wedding and in Santa Fe. And so he flew me and Donna and the drummer Jay Belrose, Ian Walker, who's a fantastic bass player and who changed my mind in so many ways about music, and Dom Dean Bro, who's a legendary saxophone player.
Legend.
And they flew. He said, "Listen, I want you to play electric style mantras, like, you know, for my wedding reception, and we're all going to dance."
What is an electric style mantra?
He was like, just play it like rock and roll, you know?
Is it like electric jazz?
Well, I mean, we were playing it cross-legged style up to that point with like mridangams and tablas and, you know,
and you were doing
harmoniums.
A lot of like gospel style kind of, I would
but
say.
I mean, I've got sort of a rock and gospel bluesy voice.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, I felt like at the beginning it was like, you know, I'm not an Indian. I'm not going to pretend to be Indian. I learned this in India, and I'm going to try and make it in my own blood.
I totally get that. It's like me
voice.
Learning Ayurveda, studying Ayurveda and practicing in America. I'm not going to have a wooden table, you know, like over uncomfortable. Yeah.
Right. So we have to, you know, so I was trying to find an authentic way in any case for me to do it.
Yeah.
And Jesse said, well, just, you know, bring an electric guitar and an electric bass and drum set, and, you know, we're going to rock it so we could dance to it. And so we played kirtans that way for him.
How did they dance, huh?
Oh yeah. Well, and I just remember like having a martini in my hand. It's like, and we're now like
with the harmonium, pumping the harmonium
on a platform.
Three
Actually,
olives.
I think Donna was playing harmonium. I was playing guitar, and but the thing was, it was like, so
It's hilarious.
yeah, it was like, okay, yeah, if these mantras are really transportable, it should be able to go beyond,
of course,
ashram, and so like they should be compatible with martinis too. And I just remember like Neil Diamond dancing to Devaki Nandana Gopala, Devaki Nandana Gopala, like without his toupee on, which is hilarious. And it was such a like scene in my life,
That's epic,
right? But we came back from that trip and went, oh, we know what to do now.
Yeah,
like this is like suddenly the record came alive because of that trip.
And that was your second?
No, yeah, my second record, Japa.
Japa, yeah.
And a lot of bunch of people sang in the choir on it and all this stuff. And so after that, and then the Mala, its successor, those things like Saul Ray, who's also a well-known yoga teacher.
He's also a sound engineer or something.
He was also
right?
a recording engineer.
Yeah, a recording engineer.
Yeah, so he produced those records. Great. And at the same time, I was also touring with him, so the whole thing kind of came together. So those records also got played a lot, and I toured a lot on them, and it that was really kind of like the first classical period of the
When
Kirtan
did you
era.
do that live record that we all chanted on?
Well, there was two of them.
Fun.
One of them I did in 2006.
In Santa Monica, remember?
Yeah, that one was in 2006, and I did another one in 2009.
That had
both
like
of
the
them.
carousel or something on the cover.
Oh yeah, that was that's Joyride. We did that. We did that in 2009.
That was so fun.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah.
And so I started involving more and more of the community and in making these records, and the tour just kind of spun out from, I think, around 2000. In 2000, I was chanting in New York City for the first time at the Jiva Mukti Center there, and I met. A couple of Germans came up and said, "Hey, we're just taking our teacher training, but we're going to open a yoga studio in Germany at some point." No, it was the Jivamukti Yoga Studio in Munich. Gabriela Bozic and Patrick Broom. They were taking their teacher training, and they said, "We're gonna open a studio, and one day you'll come." And I was like, "Yeah, keep in touch." And literally 5 years later, I get an email from them, and they've gone to my website and found me and said, "Guess what? We have a yoga studio in Munich, and so we want you to come." And that opened all of Europe for me. I started doing retreats on the Greek island of Crete with my friend Petros Hoffenrichter, who also taught there, and people would come to Crete to practice yoga and chant, and they would say, "Hey, I have a yoga studio, in Amsterdam, and why don't you come here?"
But it was a beautiful thing to do on retreat, I find.
Oh,
that
so
combination of chanting, and you came when we did the Thai yoga therapy trainings with Saul up at White Lotus and stuff.
At White Lotus, in Santa
10-day
Santa
residential
Barbara.
things that I assisted.
Which was really great, and it's a nice way to actually deeply be involved not only in yoga practices and with people personally, and to get into chanting mantras. And I subsequently do yoga retreats all over the world. It's one
You
of the
still
most,
do it?
Yeah. I'm actually going back to Crete with Gabriella in October of this year, and I'm doing another one in Ireland in September. And there've been many different places, Mexico, Bali, like all over the world.
It's a great way to travel, and then also there's always new people and like-minded people that you can connect with.
And I mean, as I've aged through this process too, I mean, I really spent 20 years on the road in a van with a band, that I think if I tried to put everybody who's ever played together with me, there's probably about 200 people who have been in my band.
Yeah, because you have to find local musicians as well,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I have a Berlin band, a Munich band, a Barcelona band, a Shanghai band, a Sydney band, a Denver band, a Chicago band, and
How did you find these people always?
You just
through a friend of a friend?
Yeah. People show up, or somebody shows up one year and say, "Hey, I play bass, and this is awesome, and I would like keep in touch if you come back."
And it's not that hard, because even I played with you in Mexico.
Right. Yes, you did.
At Haramara.
Yeah, at Haramara. What a beautiful yoga retreat.
With Denise.
Yeah. There's a whole other thing. Was that the one where we started rocking the Radiant Sutras?
Hells yeah.
Hell yeah.
We were the initial Radiant Sutra Jam.
Right. So this thing
we
has...
really were.
Yeah, we were. That was actually the first one. Because what... okay, so for the listeners, the Radiant Sutras are our friend Lauren Roche's translation of the Vijnana Bhairava, which is a Kashmir Shaivite non-dual text. It's a classic work of yoga philosophy, and if you try and read it in a lot of its earlier translations, it's really, really, really dense and difficult. Yeah. And Lauren kind of created...
beautiful translation.
It's like really full of like joy and vibrancy and love, and it reads as English poetry in a way that is like really uplifting. Right. Sometimes it's shocking.
And the older translations don't have that poetic sound to
none
it
at all,
as it should have, because it's...
I mean, it's controversial.
Well,
in terms of like how authentic it is, but you know, as I've gotten into it, I realize it's like he's trying to put across the sense of it, you know.
And he nailed that.
Yeah, he nailed that. And so what we started to do, and it's great to talk about this because you were there for the first one, is people would get up and read these poems and like we'd groove underneath it, and it became like another kind of democratization of art, where it's just like, okay, you might not think of yourself as an artist or a poet, but get up and read this thing and like sing this line.
Oh my God, there were surprises.
There were so many surprises, and stuff would come out of people that was just amazing.
Beautiful.
You know, and it's funny how like all this yoga stuff is its message is personal like discovery and empowerment. Yeah. And it's led like the art that I make to of necessity involve other people in it. Whether it's teaching like kirtan schools at places like Esalen, where I invite people to come and we put them in front of instruments and get people who've never played music before.
Throw them in the cold
Throw
water.
them in, exactly, and get them to actually make music. And it's so ecstatic, first of all, to watch people do it from my perspective, but apparently from the perspective of being a person who's suddenly playing music for the first time in a band.
Well, there's also always this perception, and I'm sure you experience that when you're leading a kirtan, that people are, you know, there's still this like, oh, this is the artist and I'm the audience, but it's not, because
it blurs it utterly.
It's participatory.
Right.
And I felt that also, you know, when I started playing guitar, which I'm a lousy guitar player, but I play. Yeah. Like you were like immediately, no, it's so easy. It's just these 3 chords and no problem and stuff. Whereas like, really, you know, and you know that people who are really, you know, musicians from the heart, you know, they would empower you to also bring that out in yourself and not go like, oh, no, forget about it.
Right.
And you can, because I've experienced that too.
For sure. And well,
with teachers and things. So I really appreciated that. And it made me feel so comfortable and encouraged me to continue.
It's a beautiful thing. I'm glad to hear that. I think, you know, in the end, each one of us walks onto the stage for a little while, but our time here is limited. The collective itself is the important thing. And this thing that we call bliss or awareness or consciousness is something that we're all deeply involved in, but we can't even say where it is, you know? Yeah. Like we share it and we think that we have it, but we can't find it. Like we don't know where it is. We're not sure how it arises. With all of the things that we've discovered in science, like the mystery of what consciousness is. I mean, it's still, the answer still eludes us. Indian philosophy has been asking these questions since way longer than Western philosophy. And it remains like the subtext of all of the music that we're making here, but it's meant to give people a direct experience, and people enter into it as musicians, as artists. I mean, if I'm singing and you're singing and we're all singing together, then who's the band and who's the audience?
And also, like you said earlier, when you get to that space of ecstasy, when you're chanting and there, like time and space and everything goes away, that to me is that.
Right, exactly.
Or as close as I can get.
That's exactly what it is. And I started to ask these questions, you know, at one point, like how does this work.
Yeah.
Because if you don't believe in it and you don't know anything about it, it still works.
Yeah.
What mechanism is at play here? When you hear music, what makes you feel it? You know, how are we connected in consciousness? And so to explore the neuroscience of it is really quite interesting, because what a chant does, for example, at first it starts slowly, and neurologically it means that to sing a long phrase slowly, you have to deepen your breathing, and you have to that process of regulating your breathing just quite naturally to sing it. Produces a certain flood, your lungs produce a certain flood of neuropeptides, which produce relaxation. It's a natural thing.
Right.
And everybody knows this.
Our
Slowly breathing
internal
down.
pharmacy.
Right, it's our internal pharmacy, precisely. And we all say, it's like if somebody's all agitated, you go, take a breath. And we know, everybody knows that to like, and then exhale slowly, you just relax. It makes you feel relaxed. So the chant does that, okay? At first, but it also speeds up. And normally what happens is that we have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic nervous system. They work normally in tandem, but one follows the other. And so the hypothalamus is trying to create a balance in many different ways in our body, even in terms of like regulating our temperature, our breathing, our moods, in many, many different functions. But normally what will happen is you get really super excited. That's your sympathetic, nervous system. And often like fear can be involved in that.
But the thing is, we cannot control these two nervous systems. That's the
well,
thing.
we don't think we can.
No, I know, what the doctors,
yeah.
Western medicine
Western
says.
medicine is right. But there are practices that can do it.
Exactly.
And
you can override that.
Yoga, music, dancing does this. So the thing is that when you get too excited, the body wants to chill you out. So then the parasympathetic nervous system,
the fight and flight.
Right, the fight and flight gives way to relaxation.
Which comes all from the reptilian part of the brain.
Right, but you can get too deep into relaxation, so then you need to be excited, etc. And so our days alternate between like kind of going up and going down, and most people experience these fluctuations of mood and mind. However, under certain circumstances, both of them can be induced to fire simultaneously. And the way that most people experience it is actually sex. So an orgasm is actually maximal stimulation of both.
Both hemispheres.
They're both firing.
Or both nervous systems.
Both nervous systems are firing simultaneously. That produces an orgasm. You're maximally excited and maximally relaxed. And so what a chant is doing is it starts with the relaxation thing, but the repetition stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, so you become progressively more excited. It gets faster and faster and faster, but you have not lost, you're still singing, you're established in regulated breathing. So your parasympathetic nervous system does not give way to your sympathetic nervous system. It remains in place. It remains firing. And the sympathetic nervous system starts firing at the same time. So it's kind of like a kind of speedball cocktail, to use a drug metaphor. It's an upper and a downer at the same time. And it produces an indescribable, in a good way, in a self-created way, from an internal pharmacy. And so that's a really exciting experience for people, just that alone. But there's a lot more going on in there. For example, I believe the structure is called the angular cingulate. There's a structure in your kind of mid-front brain that is associated with compassion, and music seems to stimulate it, so you get this feeling of like connection and compassion because that part of your brain that's wired for it is stimulated by music. So it is of necessity a thing that creates a collective sense and a feeling of connection. At the same time, your brain has structures that create a sense of where your body starts and stops. Okay, so in this place, it's located in, I guess, what yoga calls the crown chakra. You have an image of your body that is created in the brain, okay? And it says, the world is out there, and this is where my body is.
Your separateness, like basically the boundary of your skin.
Yes, exactly.
To the outside world.
Right, which seems like it's a boundary, but if you look at yourself,
well, how we perceive it.
How we perceive it. But actually, we're really a cloud of electrons.
Yeah.
So
and we're made of stardust.
Yes, we are. But the thing is, the distinction between us and the world is actually not so clear. I mean, we're all breathing, so there's always clouds of like oxygen and nitrogen, moving in and out of us. We're respiring from our skin. So from like a perspective of an electron microscope, we're really a cloud that kind of doesn't really have quite the same definition that our mind creates. When we chant, the signal in our brain that says I am here gets turned off. Yeah. And there's kind of two functions to it. So to oversimplify it, the left side produces a kind of a signal that says I am, and the right side is concerned with context. Okay, so I am here. Yeah. When this slows down, you get a sense of like a boundless self.
Yeah.
And chanting and also dancing or running intensely.
It's an expansion in a way, because that's what we do all the time. We contract and we expand, like everything in the universe, right? And this is what an expansive practice.
Right.
To get out of that boundary of our skin and space.
So the part of the brain is called the parietal lobe, which is at the top, and the occipital part of it, the back part of it, is the part that's invoked here. And you can watch on a scope, if you would chant with an MRI on, which is not so comfortable, but it's been done. And when people meditate, you see a diminishment of activity in that part of the brain, and it's partly triggered by connecting to your breath in a systematic way of slowing it down and becoming conscious of it. And you can see the activity cease in that part of the brain. And when it does, people report feeling unbounded and connected. It's a real observable thing. It's not just some new age mumbo jumbo thing.
Yeah.
It's like it's a real thing. And so both the states of separation and the states of connection turn out to be neurologically verifiable.
Or measurable, whatever you want to
call it. Or
measurable,
yes. So you can see it, And there's this
scientifically.
There's this brilliant guy, Andrew Newberg, who calls himself a neurotheologist, and I was turned on to him by a book I once read called Why God Won't Go Away. And he says that our sense of the spiritual is built into our brain structures. And that even it doesn't matter whether there's a God or not, that we'll create that. I mean, our brain creates it. And that all of these states that we're talking about are, that Eastern mysticism is talking about, are neurologically valid states of the brain, and that we can use certain techniques to invoke them. There's reasons why we need to be individual selves, but there's also reasons why we need to drop that and feel like incredible compassion for one another. So if we can have practices that help us to become conversant or able to change those states, then those things are useful, and music does that. And
both are useful. I mean, to navigate through life, you have to have a certain ego, or what we call the ego. Yeah, they're absolutely necessary. But it's just we're abusing it.
Well, and also people are like, there's this goal orientation. People are always like, oh, I wish to become enlightened. It's like another like commodity or thing that you're going to get. And I don't think that's really what this is about.
No.
It's really more about to know self and mind and heart, and then to be able to choose the state that's appropriate.
Yeah. But even the old like rishis, who have like meditated in the caves, if you think what they wrote in the oldest scriptures of the world, the Vedas and the Sub-Vedas, which I had to study when I studied Ayurveda, there's texts that say that the nervous system in the body mirrors the cosmos, and the whole, it's incredible, that they saw that by observing nature.
Right.
It's 5,000 years ago.
Right. It's amazing how it anticipated like modern neuroscience.
Yeah.
So we're kind of loop back to the beginning here. And, people it's like, what good is all this ancient, stuff? And
so timeless.
It's so timeless.
And
it touches on neuroscience. It touches on psychology
It
and
was just expressed
psychopharmacology.
differently. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so like the language of yoga again is spoken in the vernacular, in the way that new generations can perceive it. I mean, what it's teaching has never really changed, but the way it teaches it has changed.
Yeah.
So the yoga movement seems to have now sort of moved through a period of like it developed and it really literally spread out over the world, and it's become a kind of transnational culture. And so you can meet yogis, in everywhere from Boston to Buenos Aires, and it becomes a kind of like, I don't like to use the word tribe because it implies boundaries and differences, and whereas yoga is oriented more toward how we're connected.
Should we say movement?
Movement's maybe a better way.
Yeah.
But it's become an actual global culture, which itself is a really fascinating phenomenon.
Yeah.
And oddly, all of the philosophy was always contained in chanting. That's the thing. People encounter yoga first as like physical movement these days, but that was really largely invented in the 20th century.
Yeah.
Whereas all the philosophy of India was conveyed through the mantras
and through verse.
Yeah. And the idea was that you practiced it. It wasn't in a book on a shelf. It was in your experience, in your awareness. And so music keeps bringing us back to that. It's a funny thing now as we're having this conversation. The coronavirus has suddenly just shut the world down, and the yoga movement, which so depended upon the ability of people to transit easily from one place to another, has suddenly come to an actual stop, because people.
What do you mean?
I mean, people that are involved in this, like, often we routinely like, oh yeah, I'm going to India, I'm going here, I'm going there.
You mean physically, like
physically?
Yeah.
Physically,
Geographically,
it's come to a halt. Like for a period of time now, we don't have free movement across the globe the way we did. And as a musician, I'm personally suddenly confronting what that means to me, and I'm certainly not the only musician.
And we don't even know the time constraint.
No, we don't. We know that the virus itself is a global phenomenon.
But did you hear about that novel that was written in 1981, and they predicted this?
No.
Word by word, it popped up on all of my Instagram.
But it strikes me, just from the point of view of this conversation, which, who knows, this thing may be all over by the time by the time it airs.
Yeah.
But people's response to it is itself a kind of global awareness and global consciousness, and it may be. India taught me to try and find what was good about something that was apparently bad.
Yeah.
And the transitions that this will make for us in terms of consciousness are profound, in terms of how we connect to one another, how dependent upon one another
crisis,
we are.
So
out of
speak.
crisis, something new is born. And so it strikes me that there is a possibility that it's already shifting the conversation in a lot of ways. Just from the perspective of the United States, we've gone through this vast, like, hyper-capitalist era where people are like, it's all about me first, and and it's created tremendous, like, social discontent and inequality.
But this puts the brakes on everything right now.
Yes.
And globally. So
we literally have to sit still.
Yeah.
So the only real response to it is something like sit and meditate and go into yourself. And it seems like this is maybe something that we can use to transit to like another kind of era.
I feel the same way, because it's almost like, it comes a virus or bacteria, whatever, the diseases comes from nature.
Right.
It's not, do we know some people have this conspiracy theory, it's been made in the lab, or it comes from here, or whatever. But I feel like it's almost a power that is a natural cycle that needs to invoke a new era.
Right. And that seems to be what's happened. It's certainly already changed the conversation in America about, healthcare. like suddenly even Republicans.
Don't get me started about that
but
one.
sometimes even Republicans are saying, well, it's for us all to be protected. It's like everybody's got to have it, and they're saying, well, it might sound like socialism, but what are you going to do? It's the
I know
only
one
response.
person in America who I want to have it to have.
Well, we don't have to name him, but
I'm just saying.
Right. But
there's a possibility.
There's a possibility. We don't know what is going to happen with this, but I know that as an artist, one of the things I'm having to confront right now is that what I have been doing for the last 20 years is traveling the world, gathering people together en masse, like ranging from like 50 people in a yoga studio to thousands of people at a festival to chant together. I cannot do that now.
Yeah.
I can't get on a plane, and most countries now where I play are forbidding any gatherings of people over 100. I literally have had to stop as an artist, and most musicians are confronting this, whether they chant mantras or not. But suddenly we cannot play live music.
But a lot of other industries as well. I've heard of movies being canceled, being made.
For sure. Everything's on hold.
Yeah.
And I'm just now beginning to confront what that's about. I mean, maybe it's time to get back to what I was doing before I was chanting, which was writing songs in English.
Yeah.
And at least I can use the medium of the internet to put it out there. But the songs that I write in English are philosophical. And what I ended up doing is I found that if I went into the sounds that I was making, like they all arise as nonsense. And if I follow those sounds to the meaning of those sounds, patterns start to emerge. So I don't sit down and go, I'm writing a song about. I write a song in a wordless language. The melody usually comes really quickly. And the words come from me leaning into the sounds that I'm making until I hear a word come from those sounds. And then there's other words start to come, and then after a while there's enough of them that I start to put them together and go, I start to connect the dots and find a meaning in it. And then there's usually a moment. First I'm confounded by it. I really don't know what it's about. It's not making any sense to me, but now there's some actual bits of English words showing up. And then one day all of a sudden it leaps into clarity for me. I'm like, oh, I just got the about of this. And it's like I'm now taking the inarticulate speech of my heart and spirit and trying to put it into language that my mind can discuss. It's a whole other process. And it's a different kind of thing with an audience, too. I'm having to get used to it. That, then it takes a while to find these words. And when they do, inevitably I've discovered that these songs are deeply philosophical. They're poetical and they're philosophical, and they come out of the sounds that I'm making. Now the challenge for me is I'm so used to an audience participating. I'm so used to actually disappearing into the music itself.
So now it would be different because you would be singing them and they would be listening.
Yes.
Or maybe at some point...
Right.
They would also be singing along because they become so popular.
Right. But
in your next arena tour.
Yeah, I guess so. But I realize it's like, yoga keeps telling me to confront my discomfort. Okay. Yeah. And so it was uncomfortable for me to finally say, well, I'm going to make a record that doesn't have any Sanskrit mantras on it. It's like it's in English. And I'm working with jazz musicians who are conversant in this too, and so the process of essentially
what an appropriate word to use, conversant, for a jazz musician.
Yeah. And so it's been a process, another process of confronting myself, because I realized in some ways even disappearing into the chant was itself a part of a process that's not finished, okay? It's trying to get myself as ego out of the process of performing. And so to disappear into Sanskrit and to be chanting with the crowd, that allows it. But yet, at the same time, I'm also not necessarily taking responsibility for what it is that I am saying. And the question is how do I write songs and play songs in English without my ego being present in it.
But you needed maybe that other phase in
Right.
order to get there.
In order to get there. And because I can't go do group chants now, like,
but that's cool that you're exploring that.
Right. But I realize, like, now I'm confronting, another level of who am I and by what right do I say this, and who needs my music, and like how is it that I can get up in front of a crowd and sing,
because
songs about the nature of perception, or like me confronting the possibility of my own death, or me confronting my own depression and how I get out of it, or me confronting how it is that we all try to connect to one another, and yet no matter how close we get, we can't quite arrive in that place. We have a social media universe in which you supposedly can connect to so many people, and yet we end up still, actually, it somehow reinforces our loneliness.
Yeah, I agree. But I think, there's this famous letter that Martha Graham, I think, wrote, where she says, your art matters, and because there's only one you, and if it doesn't come out of you, and the world will not see it.
Right, exactly.
And that's enough.
Yeah, it is enough.
All,
it is enough.
Yeah, because then these little voices, in our heads tell us, like,
and it may be that the future is one in which more and more people are empowered to be artists in one way or another. We'll have machines that do a lot of the work. Mm-hmm. We'll have artificial intelligence that processes a lot of things that otherwise have occupied our minds. And it comes back to music. It comes back to art. It comes back to the things that bring us together and transport us. And if anything's important, it's that. Yeah.
I mean, if there would be no art, what would it be worth fighting for? It's what Winston Churchill said.
Right. I mean, we started as dust and we'll end as dust, and in the middle, like, the only meaning that there is the meaning that we put there.
And everything goes back to creativity. I mean, us even being born is creativity there physically. So.
Right. But, we have to make our art and also let go of it.
Yeah. Of course.
That's how it...
Holding on, that's the ego again.
That's the ego, yeah. So you have to let it out.
And not be attached to it. Be detached from it.
There's a story, it might even be a way of ending the conversation, or who knows where it goes. But when I lived in India...
8:30.
Okay, we've been talking for a while. When I lived in India, I went on what's called a yatra, kind of spiritual, a spiritual trek, and spiritual journey. And I went to a town called Dehu in Maharashtra, and the Saint Tukaram Maharaj used to live there. And he was known for writing ecstatic abhangas, which are, devotional praise songs to God. And he lived in the 12th century. And he wasn't very good at holding a job. But he was very good at writing poetry. But the thing is, at that time, you really had to work and in order to live, and people didn't really see the use of art. Art was something that people did in the courts around the kings, and only people who had money and education had any use for art, and other people just worked. So Tukaram became sort of a little bit of a pariah in his village, and because all he could do was just like praise the divine and write poetry. So apparently the town elders came to him and said, "Listen, you have to stop, with this crazy,
this nonsense,
this nonsensical, this ecstatic poetry, and and if you don't stop, you can't live here." And he said, "What do you want me to do?" And they said, "Well, throw all of your poems into the river." And so he said, "Okay, comes from God, goes back to God. So what? There's always more. All right, I'll throw my poems into the river." But he doesn't take the whole book of them and throw them into the river. He throws them in one at a time. And the story says that the poems floated down the river, and that people started to find poetry floating down the river. And ladies would be doing their wash or whatever, and these things would. And so his poetry starts being read and then sung in the same way that we were like singing the Radiant Sutras. You know, people would pick up these poems and read these poems, and word gets back to Dehu, like it's Tukaram's poetry, you know. So then, of course, they build a temple, charge money to come in, and he becomes very famous. But the thing is that he gave it up. He gave it away. He wasn't holding on to it. He didn't say this is mine or I'm trying to profit from this. He just said it arose and I'm letting it go. I let it go upon the waters. And it's that act of giving that made it accessible. That's what made it
But that's a
valuable.
true artist.
Right.
And I feel like I've read this book, I think it's called Songwriters About Songwriting or something, and every single one of them says, it's not mine, it comes through me.
Right. Right. It just comes
like
through.
It's channeled through me for whatever reason that you open yourself up to it.
Right. That's exactly the experience that I have when I write a melody. It just shows up like it's some sort of natural fact of the universe. It just exists, and I feel like I just discovered it, but it doesn't feel like it's mine. Yeah. You know? So, you know, I think that's the lesson of all of this is just give it away. Let it go through. Don't judge what it's good for or who your audience is, you know? But
your art matters. Do your art.
Do your art. Examine
the
yourself.
The world needs it.
Confront your challenges, you know? Keep moving through it. So
awesome. Cool.
Wow.
All right. Are we thirsty and hungry?
Yeah, we're thirsty and hungry.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks for asking the questions. Thanks for having me here to talk about these things. I realize it's been a long time now, Andrea. We've known each other for a long time. And like the history of the yoga movement and all these things are like tied up. And
went through many phases of those together. Yeah. Awesome.
All right, let's get some food.